begins. I'd like to welcome everybody, officers, members of the public, to our committee today, the Communities, Environment and Highway Select Committee, for our second meeting of the year. The usual notes that I have to read out. Excuse me. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, everybody present is asked to exit out of the Ashcombe suite, walk down the corridor, turn right down the stairs, and out of the front entrance of County Hall. Please disperse to Kingston Town Centre for 30 minutes unless there are signs that the alarm is a drill. In line with the Council's guidance on the use of social media, I am happy for anybody attending today's meeting, including members of the Council, to use social media, provided that this does not disturb the business of the meeting. Please note that today's meeting is being broadcast live via the Council's internet site as part of our webcasting facility. And the usual plea, penalty £10 to the Chairman's fund. Can I please ask committee members or any officers present to speak clearly and directly into their microphones, and please ensure your mobile phones are turned to silent. Infringement will be treated brutally. First, apologies for absence. John Fury has apologised, but I thank John very much for participating very actively in the pre-meeting we had earlier this week. And John does not have a substitute this morning. Also, our Vice Chairman Andy MacLeod and Becky Rush are being detained by the inevitable traffic delays. Maybe Mr Goodman, when we come to Heathrow, we can elaborate on that, how we can get our trains and roads flowing freely so that members can actually attend meetings on time. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting. We met on the 1st of July. Are those minutes agreed? Yep, excellent. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Do we have any? No, we don't. Thank you very much. Questions and petitions. None have been received. Before we move on to item 4, and I hope Huma won't be embarrassed, but this is Huma's last meeting with us. She's not going far. She's defected to the cabinet, and it's truly, our loss will be their gain, because Huma's been an absolutely superb officer for our committee, absolutely professional. We'll miss you, and we'll occasionally pop round and say hello to you. So thanks, Huma, very, very much indeed for all your help you've given the committee and to me personally. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, now we move on to item 5, the Surrey Fire and Rescue Transformation Working Group final report. And of course, this will be moved seamlessly into the this substantive item on the fire service as the next item on the agenda. I think we've got the chairman of the task group, Chris Barton, and Jan as members. It's an opportunity maybe for Sajja or the other members to sort of highlight some of the points in the report, which I think was comprehensive. No need to go through it all. We've all read it. But any points you'd like to draw our attention to for a short discussion, and then we'll take that into the main meeting with with Denise and the officers on the substance of the report. So, Saj, anything you'd like to say first?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Thank you. Is that on, is it? Yeah, I think it's on. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to echo my appreciation for Huma, because without Huma, I don't think this work would have been possible. And she's attended virtually every single meeting. She set up all the meetings, and she tried to get as much witnesses as possible. In fact, sometimes she's gone out of her way. So thank you, Huma, for that. The Fire Transformation Group was set up by the Environment Select Committee, now the Communities, Environment and Highway Select Committee, to support the transformation of the fire service and to provide independent scrutiny on the Making Surrey Safer, our community safety plan. Between March and July this year, the working group has spoken with 17 stakeholders and has listened to their views and concerns on Making Surrey Safer, our community safety plan. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the witnesses whom we have spoken to for their willingness and efforts. It has been greatly appreciated. The evidence heard at witness sessions has helped the working group formulate a series of recommendations for consideration for the Select Committee. I believe the recommendations contained with the working group's report are impactful and will help strengthen the Making Surrey Safer, our community safety plan. I would like to give residents and stakeholders the assurance that the proposed plan will be scrutinised by the Select Committee on a quarterly basis, and any areas of concern will be forwarded to the Cabinet for further investigation. I look forward to receiving members' comments.
Thanks, Satch, very much. This opportunity, briefly, for Chris or Jan to add anything to what Satch just said, and if not, we'll go straight into questions.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to Sarge for permitting me to join the task group, which I thoroughly welcomed, and I thought it was a rigorous and thoughtful working group, which is a pleasure to be part of. The most significant concerns that the witnesses raised with us were the levels of staffing which currently exist within the service, and concerns that any changes made to the operational arrangements as per the proposed plan would be unwise until the service had reached a full establishment and made up for the reductions in numbers over the last few years. The task group was mindful of the fact that it was not really possible for it to second guess the operational requirements of a service, which is a matter for the technical expertise of the officers. But we did feel confident that the first priority was to establish the full capacity of staffing to enable all the various stations to be fully staffed, both with on-call firefighters and establishment firefighters. I found the witnesses that we heard courteous and thoughtful, and I would heartily recommend the recommendations to the committee, Chairman.
Thank you, Chris, very much, and I thought the report was both thorough, comprehensive, and very persuasive. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could I refer you to paragraphs 18 and 19? This is the concern for the vulnerable. Paragraph 19 responds that mitigations measures have now been included. Maybe know just a little bit more about what those mitigation measures are.
It was felt that the actual consultation wasn't, people weren't able to access it. So we recommended that in future, all aspects are taken into account, and the forms are available, questions are available in all formats for everybody to take part in.
I'm sorry to come back, Mr. Chairman, but what are the mitigation measures in terms of the concerns of the vulnerable that are referred to in that paragraph?
Helpful. Thanks, Ken. It's a very fair question. Rather than Sarge answering it, I think this one is for the officers and Denise, as it's the service that carried the consultation. So, we'll come to them and we'll make sure that your question is directly answered there. Is that okay?
Thank you. I think the words Chris has used has been spot on. It was the number of witnesses that came to us, and we visited them, like East Hampshire. We went down to Eastleigh. Was enlightening, really, because you're looking at how different fire services actually deal with their issues there, and it's a good thing to go out and see how other people do it. I think the thing that came over to me greatly was the fact that most people, it's actually in here on 3.1, where they're worried about the increase in times for the night time when they've cut back the number of pumps, the increased response times at night. And it said the majority of witnesses were unhappy with the proposed response models. And that came over probably one of the most important aspects of this, that people have not saying, oh, the fire service shouldn't do anything, but they were just standing back and saying, I'm not really sure that this is going to be achieved. The only thing I would say is the service did assure us that they would come back up to full complement numbers, and therefore we can only hope that's the case, because this was the overriding feeling I got, that people were not happy with the response times at night. Thank you. Oh, and I'd like to say, Humour has been magnificent. The best officer. I've been here 18 years, and that was superb. You're writing up and explaining and on the ball all the time. It was wonderful. Thank you, Humour.
Careful, she'll be taking over the chairman's position. But, absolutely. And Jan, that's a really good point, which I think is covered very effectively in the second recommendation, to give us assurance that the targets are being met, that we will see on a quarterly basis the response times, and ensure that they are what the service has said they will be. Sorry. Any other questions or comments? I have to say, I think the report was so comprehensive, and we've spoke to so many people, and as we say, has come back that to me it's a very, very good report. And from a personal point of view, I would suggest that we adopt it, all the 6 recommendations, and agree the report as part of our committee recommendations, ultimately to the cabinet. But there's also an opportunity, if colleagues wish, to add any other suggestions before we get to Denise and the officers on the main report. I don't see any, so can I take that as read, that we adopt in full the recommendations of the task group? Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So now we're making very good time, and gives us more time to grill the team in the nicest possible way, of course. Remember, of course, that in July we went through much of this already, so there's no need to, I think, to repeat points that have already been made, including within the task group. But you have the opportunity, Denise and Steve and Sarah, to make any initial brief points before we get into questions and clarifications and policy recommendations. So, perhaps Denise, you'd like.
Thank you. So can I first start by thanking the working group. This has been a tremendous piece of work that has been undertaken over a series of months with some very extensive witness sessions, and thanks obviously go to the witnesses as well. So, and thank you for facilitating that piece of work. I think the work that's been undertaken by the Transformation Working Group reflects the rigour and the attention that has been given to these proposals throughout this process. Since their inception, we have had, as you know, the National Fire Chiefs Council Advisory Panel supporting this process continually and providing that sounding board for us to test our proposals, to investigate the evidence, to validate the data, and to basically give us that assurance that the approach that we're taking to address the immediate risks in Surrey and this very timely approach that needs to be taken is the right approach in order to protect the residents of Surrey. So we're all sincerely grateful to the Select Committee for enabling the adequate and appropriate scrutiny to take place, and we're confident that that has happened. So I think I'll defer to our Chief Fire Officer to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here again. Again, I'd like to reiterate my thanks to the working group for the work and the engagement with both us and so many of those stakeholder groups which you highlighted as well. And that has been very, very helpful in shaping our thinking, as well as for yourselves as well, for your own processes. So we've talked about the plan, and I know you've read it. I just wanted to recap that the plan is about us modernising Surrey Fire and Rescue Service. It's long overdue. Our plan sets out how we'll do this. Our plan describes our purpose, that as a fire and rescue service is to prevent emergencies from happening in the first place. But if they do happen, we must and always will respond appropriately. So in order to do this, we need to change what we're doing now into something else. We need to change the structure of the service to deliver these life-saving outcomes, which are based on risk assessments. We know that preventing incidents from happening will save lives. Our service hasn't changed its structure really for 40 years. We've had the same shift system since the 70s. And our current model was designed then. Since then, Surrey and the whole world has changed. And we know that prevention activity is the most effective way to save lives. Fires numbers have fallen nationally, and they've fallen in Surrey too. Legislation, the national framework, our recent inspection, which is still in the front of our minds, less than a year old, from the HMICFRS, current thinking and recommendations emanating from the tragedies like Grenfell, which we will hear more of during this year, I'm sure, and legislation will follow, and our own risk assessments that we've taken in the last year, and that helped us come to the conclusion that this plan was the right way to go, all point to us needing to modernise and urgently undertake much more prevention and protection activity. We will keep our current response standard across Surrey, and we are also working now and will continue to work in improving on how we achieve it. And we've talked to the group about some of the work that's undergoing to make sure that we are able to improve the current response standard and how we will be quicker to respond in the future. But we do need to resource delivering this life-saving prevention work so that we can focus on how to prevent emergencies from happening in the first place. That is our purpose, particularly, as we've said here already, to the most vulnerable people who are at the highest risk. And this means restructuring and modernising our service. To make this happen, as being described, and we've heard from the witnesses that the group has engaged with, we will be changing night cover at a number of locations. That is in order to allow us to have the resources at the right place at the right time in order to do that. And our resourcing must follow the risk and our prevention activity. So instead of on a number of fire stations having 3, we'll have 2, and on a number of fire stations where we have 2, we'll have 1 available at night time. And on 3 of the fire stations, as you know, we are saying that we don't need to have a fire engine and crew available immediately, and those areas will be covered at night time now by neighbouring fire stations. We will be covering them with neighbouring fire stations, and we can do this because the response activity at night is a lot lower than it was. We're not as busy as we were previously at night time, and we were busy a number of years ago when we were co-responding at night time, but we no longer do that either. So we are able to, and we also know, that the road networks in Surrey are the busiest in Europe, but at night time they're not as busy, and that also helps us get around quicker as well. So, in conclusion, we need to focus on high-risk people, high-risk places, and ensure that we've done everything we can to lower the risk of incidents, and that at night time, particularly when people are sleeping, they are awake, up and outside by the time the fire service has been called. And that's what our prevention work will be aimed at for those most high-risk people. So finally, I'm in a new role. Huma's leaving. She's been great. And it's been a pleasure and quite enlightening to work with the group. And I've learnt a lot from you all over these last few months as well. So I'd like to pass on my thanks as well.
Steve, very much, and Denise. I've got a couple of questions. I hope they're all straightforward and can be answered very swiftly. First is probably to Denise. Can we take it that you, and moving on to the Cabinet, will accept in its entirety the 6 recommendations of the task group?
So the recommendations are very fair and very reasonable. The recommendation around establishment is we are planning for establishment, so we have to caveat any establishment arrangements for April with our ability to deliver against that. So we are giving that assurance that we can do that. Thank you.
I think you said yes. I mean, it's a simple 6 recommendations that this committee has endorsed and are sending up to you as Cabinet. It's important, even if the word is just yes, we support the recommendations, and when you introduce this item to Cabinet and Cabinet hopefully approves it, those 6 recommendations of this committee are part of that process. I hope that's a simple question to which you give. Yes. Perfect. Excellent. Second question, and I think it's our job to voice the concerns of the public and others. So again, although we've covered them these parts in your in the task report, in the task group work, and in the presentations, I'll still ask, as Chris Botton said, the issue of staffing. You have to go on Facebook pages of the unofficial sites. X station is closed because we haven't got the staff to do it. Can you, as much as you can, by April 2020, when the service is back to full complement, is it entirely reasonable for us as a committee and our residents to be assured that those Facebook sites, X station is closed because of staff, will not happen again because we have reached the appropriate staffing level, the optimum staffing level?
I think it's probably best if I answer that one, Mr. Chairman. Since September last year, we've been recruiting. We've been recruiting people new into the service. We've been recruiting people who want to transfer to our service. And in that time, we've recruited 83 full-time staff into Surrey. And we are also recruiting on-call firefighters as well. Our plan and our service depends now and in the future on having enough staff in order to deliver our capabilities. The recruitment drive that we've taken is enormous. We are probably 20 people short in our whole-time establishment at the moment. And we have a recruits course going on at the moment, and another one starting in the new year. And we are probably roughly 30 short in our on-call. We have a whole programme concentrating on our on-call, which is going to start if this recommendation goes through Cabinet. And we will be doing that probably anyway, because we want to look at how we attract and make our offer more attractive for the on-call. We have got another 20 people for on-call, however, being recruited right now. And so we feel that by April, we will be very close to, or as near as we can be, onto full numbers as well. Already, we've seen the difference that has made to our staffing availability. We've reduced the amount of overtime that is used in the service significantly, and we've done that in agreement with the Fire Brigades Union, who wanted that to happen. And at the same time, we've increased the levels of our availability across our operational crews in Surrey over the past few months, despite the fact that we've also been on holiday season. Her Majesty's Inspectorate have been back in the last few weeks. It was one of the areas of their cause of concern, and they will be reporting on their findings in the next 5 weeks. I can't talk about those because they are their findings, not mine, and therefore it is for them to say. However, we know that we have been working very hard in the last year in order to make sure we're recruiting our numbers. I can't talk to what has been said on unofficial Facebook sites about whatever. We do know they are talking about firefighters that are stationed, or every person who works in Surrey County Council has a base post. For us, mostly for firefighters, that is a fire station that's part of the employment ways we employ people. We don't actually manage our fire service in that way. We manage it dynamically by moving our resources, people and fire engines around on a day-to-day basis. And so sometimes when you see some of those figures, it can be a bit misleading.
My final question before opening up to colleagues is another, a comment that we hear regularly, both in correspondence. All councillors have received various messages from constituents and others, that this is a part of a cost saving, that this is financially driven, and that what they would regard as the deterioration in service is driven by the council wishing to cut costs. Your comments, please.
I think we're all aware there was a £6 million savings target for this year, which was removed in advance of these proposals being worked up. these proposals have not been around delivering savings targets. Any revenue that's generated from the actions of the proposals are being reinvested into the service, and you have details of that within the report. There's a £1.9 million investment into prevention and protection, a £0.3 million investment into on-call provision, as a significant capital investment. So this is around securing and safeguarding the future of the service in order to keep the residents of Surrey safe. You want to add to that?
I think the only thing I would add is that we've actually had additional investment to our normal budget, which is going to be maintained, as Denise has explained, in order for us to just change our shape. We've had additional investment in order to help us deliver this transformation as well. So that is of just short of £1 million, £900,000, to have additional staff, other than fire service expertise, to help us deliver this transformation over the next few years.
Colleagues, Keith first.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I take up a point with the Chief Fire Officer that he and I discussed at a meeting some months ago, but I haven't heard anything about recently. All the time, firefighters are coming up to retirement age, and at the moment, as I understand it, there is a binary choice for a firefighter. One is to go through the process of the fitness examination to make sure that they are still fit for firefighting duty. The other choice is to retire, and that's it. Do you have any plans to utilise a third choice? Firefighters who don't want to retire but may not be as fit as they were to be out on active duties, with regard to the prevention services that you've emphasised so much. Because some of our firefighters who have not just years but decades of experience, I'm sure, would feel very interested in some other activity within Surrey Fire and Rescue that was putting their experience to that good use in terms of preventing future incidents and fires. What progress is there on that?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we've certainly looked at that, and we've been speaking with staff about that as well. You're right, all of us, including me, pass our fitness test annually, and we have a medical every 3 years. That's right, because it's a risky business, and we need to make sure that all of our firefighters are fit and well in order to undertake that. However, this is about the role of the firefighter expanding beyond that of just intervention and firefighting. We are talking with the workforce about that, and the Fire Brigades Union as well, who are the main negotiating body for that. These are national terms and conditions that we have to meet, and they're difficult to negotiate locally. Across the country, any local arrangement still has to be rearranged and re-agreed locally every time. So no fire services have done anything on that at the moment, but we are intending to do that. We're looking to expand the role of the firefighter beyond that of purely firefighting as well, but that is have to be done at national negotiation level. There are also a number of pension restrictions about re-employment of people as well. So it would have to be a continuance of somebody within that role, and of course we are looking at that as well. I absolutely agree with you. We have great people out there who have lots of experience, and I would like to keep that experience within the service, particularly now when we're going into prevention and protection activities, and we need to change gear on that quite a lot. And people with all that experience who know Surrey very well and know the risks as well will be a great asset to us. And so we're exploring, if this is agreed in Cabinet to take forward, ways in which we can retain and maintain that expertise and skills within the service, given the restrictions that I've just put out.
Okay, thank you. Next is Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to, I'm sorry to harp on about staffing. What I'm hearing from you is that the recruitment process, with a view to being up to establishment in April, is doing well and is well on course, and in fact ahead of schedule, perhaps. And I'm pleased to hear that. And so the hope is that by April you're likely to be with a full establishment. However, I'm also mindful, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that recruitment isn't the end of the worry, because when you recruit new members of the service, they need to be trained. And what we're looking for, what we need by April, is a full establishment of trained staff. Now, it may be that when we get to April, you don't have the training finished, and you're still then going to be stretched and possibly in trouble. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and please let me know what the response would be in April if that's the situation. And can I just then also put my point about the vulnerable people and the measures that are taken?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an enduring issue for all organisations, recruitment and retention as well. So you're quite right. It's not just about recruitment. It's about attraction. It's about being a place that people want to stay and retaining our people as well. All of that does take quite a long time, which is why we've been lucky with the investment that we've had. We've had some 3 organisational development HR specialists put into the service, and they're helping us with our campaigns, and with our learning and development and training teams are also helping us programme in continued recruitment cycles as well. It takes us quite a number of months. The minimum would be 6 to 10 months in order to attract staff and get them out of the other end. So we've done really well in the short time we've had since then. What we're going to do is maintain this, and we're looking at ways to improve it, and we're particularly concentrating on the next phase, on the on-call, how we improve the attraction and retention for on-call. We've done a lot of work, which you've heard about already, and had a lot of success with whole-time firefighters. But it's that inflow and outflow and the maintenance of that which is the issue. We've now got some really good staff on board which are helping us to look at that design, at that organisational design, and how we maintain our numbers. And I'm seeing that is going well at the moment, and I'm confident that we will maintain and improve that as well going forward. If I can now pick up on your second point about the most vulnerable, you're absolutely right. That is the main thrust of what this prevention and protection activity that we need to undertake is about. We're going to be the first adopters of the National Fire Chiefs Council risk-based approach for people. It's a people-centred approach, and I know I've described it to the working group before as well, and we've described it to other groups as well, and I'm happy to be able to do that to anyone else. The person-centred approach looks at the risks that an individual presents, and we're also adopting a second layer of that about where they are, the places in where they are. So sometimes you can have high-risk people and you can have high-risk places, and sometimes they can be together. We're taking an approach that analyses both of those. Those that are at highest risk, we will be intervening within 24 hours to make sure that we have reduced the risk that they have, whether that is within their lifestyle or their unfortunate circumstances or in the places they are living at that moment. So our scheme that we will be adopting in the future and our approach to the most vulnerable will be adopting these nationally recognised ways in which we would be able to address them.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I heard the reply, and it really refers me to other papers, doesn't it, actually, I need to look at. So I won't pursue it for now, but I may have to talk to you afterwards.
Your pleasure.
Got quite a long list now, but that's great. Jonathan.
Thanks, and apologies for being late. Two questions. One is about the change in the number of visits, particularly at night time, and the other is about prevention and then how they fit together. Firstly, the published times to go to different for the first appliance on page 207, which is Appendix C2, are those times averages to go to a specific location, or are they the average to go to a house? So, presumably the fire stations typically are nearer where people live than the rural areas. So, the median is not the same as the mean in terms of where you might go to. More fires presumably are going to be called out to where houses are burning rather than places of empty countryside, maybe where the heath is burning, where Mike Goodman is, perhaps, down in Surrey Heath. But apart from the burning heathland, I presume more fires will be at properties, so it won't be an even spread over the locations of an area, it will be focused. So are the numbers here for the response times like the average response times to the likely location of a fire, or are the averages for a location across that geographical area? It would be useful to know. And then from that, what's the change in risk as a result of that? And then on the other hand, you've got this increase of, wanted to check, are home fire safety checks, of which on page 82 you say there's currently 3521, the last count, up to the last financial year completed. And how is that the same as the Safe and Well visit programme, of which you say there's currently 4,500? So is the current number 3,500 or 4,500, or is the 3,500 part of the current 4,500? And do you have any quantification as the risk reduction that results from the prevention? So how can we be sure, not from a sort of a qualitative approach, but in terms of numbers, I'm an engineer, in terms of hard numbers, that the overall risk is going to be reduced from this reduction in the fire engines, which is presumably going to increase risk because they're arriving later, to more prevention, which presumably will reduce risk? My worry of this sort of quid pro quo approach is quite often prevention, the benefits happen over a very long term, whereas a fire station calling out, the risk of reduction is at that moment in time. It's immediate. So first of all, what is the comparison? And secondly, do you think it's good to equate, increase in prevention and versus is a justification for reducing the here and now?
Okay, I'll try and cover all of those points. There was a lot of them there, and if I missed them, I'm sure you'll remind me. I think we were talking about response as an average based on historical responses that we've made in those areas. So that's how we've determined the average response times. That's the running times of the vehicles from the place they were sent to where they've arrived. What we do now, due to our technology, is that we now have more geolocation and auto-on-scene technology, which allows us to be a lot more clear on what that means. And we're able to monitor that more closely than we had been historically when that technology wasn't available to us. So that's what we're using now in order to determine what those running times are. It's based on historical data on the average of where we went to and those hotspots where they are. So we know from over 5 years, and in fact going back further, where we go to most of all. Insofar as types of visits that we do visit businesses and we do visit homes as well. I understand that there may be some confusion in that, in the way in which we've done our business in the past, and I think the reforms that we're talking about in our prevention and protection activity aimed at individuals and high risk also includes prevention and protection activity aimed at businesses as well, and other places like schools. I can tell you what we're going to do. As you said, we were under 5,000 visits previously. In the first year, if this plan is agreed, we intend, with our new prevention activities, to raise that to 10,000, and by 3 years to 20,000. So between year 1 and year 3, an increase to 20,000 on where we are now. What you can't do at night time is go and wake people up to give them a safety check and a safety visit as well. So that cannot be undertaken during the night time. So a lot of the prevention activity that is aimed at the highest risk people, and also at the highest risk places, which may also not be open at time, and places that we deem to be high risk that we are interested in, like schools, etc., and other places where the public gather, they're not always open at night time. So we are unable to actually make meaningful progression on prevention activities at night time in all areas. Not completely in all areas, but in many of our areas. So that's, I hope, sort of categorise that for you a bit clearer. Insofar as prevention versus intervention, I would say that we know that prevention will make a difference. If we can stop things happening, then we will prevent those tragedies that have happened, for example, this year in Surrey, happening again, because all of the tragedies that happened in fires this year were with vulnerable people. Is it better than responding? We're not saying that. What we're saying is that we will still respond with exactly the same standard that we have now, and we intend to maintain that standard, and we are working to improve that through technological advances and advances in the way in which we work, which we've been undertaking over the last 6 months to see how they're progressing. And I can talk to you a bit more about what they are. For example, I talked about the auto on scene, which is providing us with some better data. The ways of working, we're doing pre-alert for our firefighters as well, so that when we know that there is a likelihood of an incident occurring in their area, our control staff are pre-alerting our firefighters so they're moving towards their fire engines, getting in them and being prepared to move. That does decrease the running time from where they are sent to where they arrive. I think that covers a number of the answers. I'm not sure if I've covered them all.
Thank you. Steve, are you okay with that? Or?
Just it's about quantification. So presumably you've picked the 4,500, which I guess is the 3,500 for home, plus the schools, plus the businesses and everything. You've picked the 4,500 to 20,000 because you've been able to show that that is a greater reduction in risk than the increase in risk from fighters arriving at a fire later than currently. I've not seen the detailed risk analysis, which presumably the task force has looked at. I don't know if that's available to be shared, because otherwise I'm not sure whether that many visits to the people you choose to visit is definitely going to reduce the risk. It sounds like there might be an increasing risk in the next year or two until you're up to the full strength of prevention visits, and then you're happy that the number of fires in total and the number of fatalities and casualties will go down. But I presume you've got research to back that up?
Yes, I think unfortunately you weren't here at the beginning when Denise set out that the risk assessment and the methodology we've used has been looked at by externally and verified as well, and also by members of the National Fire Chiefs Council as well. In addition, during the recent inspection, the HMI, who are reporting soon on their recent inspection, had the opportunity to look at that too. We've also been speaking to a number of other fire services who have adopted this methodology and have increased to 20,000, for example. Similarly sized fire brigades have increased to that sort of number of home fire safety risk checks. And so we believe the methodology is right. We've had it independently verified. We've had other of the UK's top professional officers, your own fire officers here today, and back at our headquarters have done this work as well. And so we do believe that it is the right methodology, the risk assessments are correct, and that the shift towards prevention, as well as to continue to respond to the same standard that we have today, is the right move to make.
Thank you, John. Chris.
Thanks, Chairman. I think it's important to note that the task group was implacable, that the service will be measured on its outputs, not its inputs, and that there was never a trade-off between safe and well visit numbers and response times. The recommendation makes plain that the scrutiny and this committee will hold the fire service accountable for its response times. But at the same time, it's also worth saying something else. I don't believe it's possible for this debate to be concluded without paying tribute to the professionalism of the fire service and the firefighters, not just in terms of the quality of the witness accounts that we heard from them and the openness to discuss it with us, but by coincidence, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had occasion to call the fire brigade. It was one evening and I had smoke coming out from my electrical fitting in the cupboard under the stairs. They arrived very promptly. And having established the fact there was no risk in isolating my electricity, which of course was their duty, they then converted their visit into a safe and well visit. They used the opportunity of visiting me in the evening to have a lengthy discussion with myself and my wife about the ways in which we were variously managing the risks that we had. They fitted 2 smoke alarms with 10-year batteries, which I had neglected not to fit in particular on the 3rd floor of our property. And so I think it's quite important to recognise that there is already out there a degree of professionalism and courtesy which we should continue to pay tribute to. None of that undermines the fact that you'll be held accountable for the response times. That's the way it is. So thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And both excellent points, which all the committee will entirely agree and endorse. Denise, yes?
If I may, Steve described some of the measures that have been introduced and are being rolled out currently in order to mitigate against any impact on response times. I think it's important to note that we do have now 6 months of data which we can rely on as evidence, and that evidence shows us that the daytime responses are now between 50 and 64 seconds quicker, and the nighttime responses are between 55 and 88 seconds quicker. So I think it's important to recognise, and that will improve over time, but within this 6-month period that we have that information to refer to. Thank you.
Useful additional piece of information. Thanks, Denise. Jan?
Yes, 2 questions. I'm really following up, I think it is, on Ken's concerns as well. It's, for me, listening has been, I think I attended every one of our meetings with the service. The feeling was always that, and it keeps coming out, and you get in the public domain, in the papers, about they didn't respond quick enough, or a station is closed. And I know what you're going to say. I've been here long enough. You're going to say, oh, well, that was in the past. But this is what the public understand, that there's some stations when I can only tell you what happened in Epsom and Ewell, that something happened in Epsom and Ewell back a few months back where it was told the station was closed because of insufficient staff. And the result, the paper said, and I don't think it's true, but the result was slower response time, and therefore 6 houses went rather than perhaps the 1 house in the first place. You're saying, yes, by April we will have staff all lined up, and we won't get this again because this is what people are saying, we're going to have stations closed, slower response times, and we're really concerned because in my own area I have high deprivation and high density, and I might tell you that these buildings were built a while back, so they don't have all the sprinklers that new buildings have. You might get in Woking where they've got it all tickety-boo. So I have a concern that you're saying things are working well with recruiting staff, but really I want to know that on day 1 of this new plan, the staff we need to actually have a full complement at every station round the county is there and ready, because I've had emails, I won't divulge, but I'm talking about probably into the hundreds at the beginning, and some of them were firemen and some of them were ordinary residents. So it's a broad concern, and then probably you've heard it anyway, but it's okay saying we've got things in place, but we have to have them in place by next April, otherwise I think we're failing in our duty. And the second question is, well, not a question, it's an observation, that when you look at this report about the service, I think there's 5 areas where we've only got 2 stars, where it says room for improvement, requires improvement. Do you feel confident with all of these areas, and some of them including staff and poor management, it could be the manager of the station itself, do you feel confident, Steve, that what you're putting in place will address all of those? Because that came out quite clear that staff weren't happy, they weren't being led by a good management team. And this, I mean, I used to work in Barclays, and you've got the same thing there. If you had a lousy manager, the branch didn't work. So it's universal, but do you feel confident those two things, one, that this plan will cover those areas where it failed and it required improvement, and also about the full complement of trained staff 1st of April?
If I may, I think you're talking about the HMI CFRS report. Is that right? Yeah. So that was the Home Office's report. So that did pick up a number of areas. We've had an improvement plan. A part of our improvement plan actually involves this. This is part of our improvement plan. So this whole plan that we put towards you today, and we're asking Cabinet to approve, is part of the journey that addresses all of those issues. It did pick out, as you say, a number of cultural issues that have been in the service for a number of years. And our improvement plan, other than what we've talked about, the structure of the service, our focus onto prevention and protection, which the report says we're woeful at as well, I agree with that. This plan addresses those, but there's running alongside that is a cultural issue within the service that we need to address, and we have got cultural plans in place to start addressing those. Addressing a culture of this organisation, it takes a long time. It's like a rusty car. We can't paint over it because it will grin through again. We need to make sure that we are addressing these issues which are deep-seated and deep-rooted. As we've said, the structure of the fire and rescue service in Surrey has not changed since the 1970s, and a lot of our understandings and the way in which we work and a lot of our processes are based on these deep-seated ways of working, which we do need to shift. Some of that is around the actions of and behaviours of our firefighters and our managers, and some of that is around the way in which the unions work as well. We need to address harassment and bullying wherever it is. We need to address our lack of diversity, which is clear and plain to see. And these are big issues. Most of them are for us in Surrey to deal with, and we will be dealing with them, and the HMI will be checking how we're dealing with them as well. And they are prominent and in the fore of our minds in this transformation. And that is why this programme is not just about, as you've probably rightly pointed out, it's not just about an operational model that delivers our main purpose to prevent incidents happening. It's also about the culture and the people behind it as well.
I might come back to Jan's point towards the end, because there was an interesting discussion at our pre-meeting. We might take this forward, but don't want to interrupt the flow of discussion at the moment. So, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I think Steve, you already kind of answered this, but this is people-centred, and the most important people in this whole thing is the firefighters. Because without them, the public wouldn't be safe. We wouldn't be safe enough. So it's industrial relationship. You've covered sort of, but as I've got it, and it's my turn to speak, I'm just saying, how are we going to address that? Because we've had countless emails, people being threatened not to speak. I mean, we had one this morning. I had one this morning where it was unanimous, That culture needs to stop. We need to take the staff on board, and it's got to be a two-way dialogue. And I hope that, in this programme, and I know it is, but it's being addressed, that we need to take the firefighters on with us somehow.
I couldn't agree more. I've seen numbers of correspondence that say, and they mostly come from the same area, that say our staff are afraid to speak out. I have to say, I don't find that personally. I spend at least one day a week on fire stations every week. I speak to all of the staff all of the time. As much as I can. I speak to them at incidents, I speak to them at fires, and they are not shy in telling me what they are concerned about. I don't mind. I'm glad to hear what they have to say. What they have to say has power. I don't know what's happening in my service unless I take the time to listen to my firefighters who are delivering the outputs that we need. I do see in our service that there is harassment and bullying, which is not acceptable. I do see that we are not diverse enough as well, and that is also not acceptable. Not all of the harassment and bullying is coming from me. In fact, I hope none of it is, and hopefully not from our officers as well. If we see it, and it is coming from any of our managers or officers, etc., we will stamp it out. We will not have any place for it in our service. And we're very clear about that. We welcome the views of our firefighters. We are here for our people, and we are here for the people of Surrey. We cannot put our own needs above those of the people of Surrey and their safety. And that is what we are here for. That's our public purpose. Those are the type of conversations that I have with our firefighters on station, is about the balancing the needs and about how we can deliver our service best that helps us, but also how we can meet the needs of the public of Surrey. And that trumps more than, that has more weight and more power and is a thing we're more interested in than our own needs. So we must put them first. And it's getting that balance right. And I am determined to stamp out any harassment and bullying, wherever it comes from, that takes place for our people in Surrey Fire and Rescue Service.
Thank you. I just wanted to give a word of confidence. I think it's important to observe that the level of staff engagement that has taken place since Steve Owen, Acting Chief and Chief Fire Officer, has been unprecedented. It takes time for that trust to build and for that culture to shift, but every effort is being made to be fully accessible, to be fully contactable. If questions are raised, the question is presented back. Have you asked your line manager? Have you asked for repeat opportunities to have this discussion? So I just wanted to give that assurance that we are making every effort to make sure that every member of staff is fully supported, fully appreciated. A firefighter will say that it's the best job in the world. It probably is the best job in the world, but we need to support our firefighters to deliver that best job in the world.
Thank you very much indeed. Becky.
Thank you. I just had a couple of comments or questions. The first one is that, probably like the rest of the councillors here and the committee members, we've received these anonymous firefighter emails, and whilst sort of appreciating there's a lot of emotion in them, they do make a point, which is that you can be as well informed and prepared as possible about fires, but if a fire happens and it's at night or there's nobody in, then the outcome is still terrible. And really, before it's all approved, just need the assurances that it's back to the prevention of fires and the education versus the response times, and whether you really have the crews on the ground to respond quickly enough, because even if you have smoke alarms, etc., you still could be at risk at night, particularly in a fire. So that was my first comment. My second one is specifically on the report, which is page 63, where it goes into the crewing model. Living in the very east of Surrey, I just wanted to understand the on-call structure, because in Oxted and Lingfield, which are the two fire stations furthest east, they're both on-call as opposed to fully crewed, I'm presuming. So does that have a knock-on effect to the response times?
I'll take your last point first, if I may. So on-call means that the firefighters are not whole time. It means that they have a pager available. Most of them do other jobs, but particularly at night time, they actually are more available than not available. But because they're on a pager, in the response times there is a built-in 5-minute delay, and that allows them to assemble at the fire station, get on the fire engine, and then move. So that is built into the response times, which you remember is our 10 minutes for the first fire engine to be there across the whole of Surrey. So hopefully that explains the difference between those areas. Insofar as night time, I'm going to have to keep saying the same thing. We will continue to respond and meet the Surrey standard, and I know you will hold me to account, and I welcome that. And we will continue to make sure we have the resources available to deliver that. And I do know you will hold me to account for that, and I welcome that too. That is right and proper. The best thing we can do is to stop fires happening in the first place. That is our main purpose. And if we do that, we will protect people and property. That will only happen if we have the ability and the resources in order to do that. We are woefully short of it at the moment. We are not the same as other fire and rescue services. Some of them are doing very well. And Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services has been really clear that we need to change in order to do that. So that means changing what we're doing. And it does mean that we will put a greater emphasis on prevention. We will maintain our response but prevention will be our main aim insofar as making sure, initially insofar as saving life, people are awake, they are outside when they call the fire service, and in order to achieve that, everybody, particularly concentrating on the most vulnerable first, but everybody will have an escape plan, a personal escape plan, in order to make that happen, in order to achieve it. To get them awake, it's going to be a smoke detector. There are different types of detectors for different people with different disabilities, and we know, and you'll know from reports in the last week, that children don't hear those as well as adults do. And that's why we don't recommend children ever sleep on their own without being looked after by responsible adults as well. There's all these sort of things that need to be taken into account. But we need to be able to be out there to be able to tell people these stories and to tell them how they can protect themselves and give them the tools and the training and the equipment in order to do that. And that, I still believe, is the right thing to do. And that's what this plan says.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Steve. Next is Paul.
Thank you, Chairman. Just want to follow on from a couple of comments that Jan and others made. There's a lot of misinformation out there at the moment, a hell of a lot. I'm quite connected to social media, you could say, and I do see a lot of stuff that is out there frightening at the residents that we represent from the unofficial Facebook pages and so on. One of the key messages you've said twice today, actually, that I didn't know, and I think is something that we need to get out there to residents, is that the strategy and the way that you work at the moment hasn't been updated since the 70s. And I think that that's a really compelling message, actually. So my question is, can you work harder towards clear, concise information and communication that residents can be reassured from? Because I think we're failing in that regard. And I'd just like to thank as well the working group, which I'm not a member of. They have clearly worked really hard towards asking, it seems to me from today, all the right questions. I'm certainly reassured from the information that's come out from this report and everything else that I've heard today. And what you said about the fire alarms and what Chris said about the fire alarms and his personal experiences, I've sent a WhatsApp message to my wife now to remind me to change my fire alarms that haven't been changed for a number of years. So thank you very much.
Yeah, if I can answer that. What the whole of that question seemed to be about was comms and about the fact that up till now we probably haven't been as successful in getting our message out about that this is a whole plan. This is about modernisation of a fire service that needs it and is being pointed towards needing it independently by the Home Office as well. So that is a difficult thing for us to do as professional officers, because we've got our heads down working on the issues and trying to organise the fire service as well. Others have time on their hands to do that, and we don't. And we are a small organisation within a county council as well, and who are really busy and have also been going through some significant changes as well. And the comms team there, although they've been working well, I think it's been working in really difficult circumstances, much reduced as well. And so we're a victim of that. We're a victim of that insofar as perhaps we haven't been as successful in saying our whole message. And you're quite right. Lots of people wanted to draw attention to one element of our plan, which was about, in order to deliver safety, etc., and prevention, we've done a full analysis of where was their capacity within the organisation that we could safely move from one area to another. The fact that that was the nighttime cover, where we have more resources than we need, and the risk is decreasing and the demand is decreasing, and yet in the prevention world we need to have more going on, and we need to switch that from night to day. We probably haven't been able to tell that as well as we should have done today, and we certainly haven't gone out and done anything proactively to combat those plethora of messages that you've already alluded to as well, which are out there. So I think you're right. A lot of the focus has been on one issue, whereas actually it's all of the elements of the plan that will make the difference together. and you will hold us to account on how that's going anyway.
Ultimately, actions will speak louder than any words. If the whole strategy is pursued successfully, response times remain, a complement is maintained, the service is sound, then a lot will follow from that. So expectations are high, and it's really up to the service and all of us in support of the service to make sure delivery actually happens. It's just really as simple and straightforward as that.
If I may just add to that, Chairman, thank you. And thank you for raising that issue, Paul. That's been a consistent message that we've been receiving consistently, and we've been doing everything we can to try and get the message out there. I think I would actually ask your committee if you could have some aspect of your working group just monitoring the level of engagement and receptiveness with our public, because that would be a test for us to be able to gauge the success that we're having with communicating that message. I think it's always important to have that. You have a very good connectivity, Paul, I know, just to be able to play that back to us so that we can make sure that we are engaging as best we can.
There's always a
ensuring
caution
that
of
people
be careful what you
understand
wish for, because I think we're going to go down that road. But
I just think that would be a useful function for you to provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I first of all reiterate what other people have said about thanks to the service and the firefighters themselves. The inspection report must have been absolutely devastating for them because, to be judged in the way that they were for doing the job the best way they could must have been absolutely awful. And Steve, I'd also like to say thanks for your honesty for recognising that there have been instances of bullying and bad behaviour within the service in the past. And certainly I think we all need to recognise that didn't happen on your watch, and that you are doing everything you can to change that. I think there's going to be a long uphill struggle to get this message across to people who are naturally very, very worried about what is going to happen as a result of these changes. And the messages that are coming out anonymously are really not helping from that point of view. One thing that does concern, a few things concern me. I mean, obviously, as has been said, we'll only know how successful the changes have been when they are actually tested. The other thing that I'm really not comfortable with is being told that that there are not cost cuttings going on. Now, I do appreciate that the £6 million that were going to be required as savings are now being diverted into improving the service, and I think that's absolutely the right decision. But can we please be honest? Initially, there was a requirement for £6 million worth of savings, and there have been requirements over the years for continual savings, as there have been right across this council. And I think to say to people, this is... Sorry, I'm not going to go back to the beginning, so I hope... I think we need to be open about this, that there have been cost pressures on the service, that the right decision was made here, that instead of requiring those savings, the money is being reinvested into the service. And I think until that message is given openly and honestly, people will always have a slight distrust in the back of their minds about what they're being told. I hope that, everything that we're looking forward to does work out. I hope the recruitment goes well, because I think if we can't recruit to the right level, then probably some of these changes would have to be reversed.
I'll comment on what I can. Obviously, I'm not in charge of the purse strings, and I'm not the person that makes the decisions about allocations within the County Council. However, that said, to date, particularly as was demonstrated, where I have said I think that's not the right thing to do, I have been listened to, and I have been listened to this year as well. So I'm very pleased that I've been given the ability to be able to make this plan happen and be given additional support as well over the next coming years in order to have the people in place to help me carry out the transformation. That said, I think your other point was about messaging and how important that will be going forward. We've got a new head of comms who's been in a few months now, and we're working very closely, particularly in the last few weeks, ironically, with the comms team as they start to sort themselves out, and we do as well. The comms and the messaging going forward needs to be better than it has been in the past. I think everyone in the room and everybody in the County Council can recognise that as well. But we need to be very clear and honest and direct about what it is, and we don't need to fear that. It is what it is, and there has to be a reason why we're doing everything, and we should be able to explain that. And our job is to provide reassurance and not drive fear into the public, as we've seen happen by other parties as well. But that has to be done in an open, honest way, and it does need that comms messaging to be concentrated on, particularly going forward, because that will be the key towards being able to put some of our prevention messages out there as well.
Just add to that, the question was asked of Surrey Fire and Rescue Service 12 months ago, what do you actually need? And that's where this work originated from. That's where the transformation funding of 975,000 originated from. That's where the removal of savings originated from. Surrey Fire and Rescue Service is now part of the Community Protection Group, which is not within the previous directorate. So some of those pressures were existing around the directorate. So there's now isolation from any immediate pressures externally. So that just gives you the assurance of that we are in control of the budget. The Surrey Fire and Rescue Service have always been very disciplined when it comes to delivering against its budget. So you've obviously got the information on the additional investment, which is significant and is appropriate to what required at the time. So I think it's just important to understand that Surrey County Council has supported Surrey Fire and Rescue Service absolutely adequately to enable this transformation to take place. Just on the recruitment, I just wanted to also give you the assurance that we have regular updates. Fire Authority have regular updates from the service on the recruitment, and we are on track to deliver against the April target, and we will continue to monitor that. So that, I think you need to understand, that takes place on a very regular basis, and we're very happy with that. Thank you.
Very much. Thanks, Fiona, very much too. I know Keith wants to come back before we do for a second time, but Andy has yet to ask, so Andy first. It's on now.
It is on. Thank you, Chairman. I think I may have mentioned it before, but shortly after I was elected, which was probably about 18 months ago, I attended an open day at the Farnham Fire Service. And one or two observations from that. I know it's quite a while ago now. But first of all, the fire service was clearly very popular with the members of the public, actually. It was one of the open days that, there's a lot for children to do. And I know you've got limited resources, but I would just say that's a very good thing to do if you can do it from time to time. There are very good reactions from the public. In terms of talking to the firefighters themselves, and I spoke to quite a few of them, certainly they didn't strike me as people who would be easily bullied, actually. They struck me as a very tough group of people who are very actually outspoken about what they thought was wrong with the service. It was clearly a morale problem. They're very committed people, but at that time, at least, there was very much a morale problem existing in the service. And I think to some extent that's backed up by, I think there was a more recent report from the Fire Brigade Union, who are also sceptical about the reorganisation. And, my general comment, you've obviously got to win these people round. You've got to win the union round, and you've got to win the firefighters round. So I don't know to what degree there's progress being made in that, but I'd just like your comments about morale and what you're doing to, win the staff round and win the union round. And I would, as I say, advise you to do events like that when you can afford to do it, not just in Farnham, but throughout Surrey. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Open days are really important to us. They're really important because they allow the local communities to see a fire station and the firefighters in their area as well. They're a great draw for children, of course, and we're very happy about that. And it gives us a great opportunity to give our safety messages out as well. And that's one of the main purposes of them, in fact, as well. So it helps us touch our communities quickly. We have asked every fire station, I've asked every fire station to conduct at least one open day per year, and that is happening now, and those are supported. They're supported really well by our volunteers. You'll have seen some Facebook issues recently claiming that an open day wouldn't take place because a crew wasn't available. Quite often crews aren't available because they're called away to go to an incident. So that's not unusual. And actually it's the people coming in off duty and the volunteers that maintain the presence on the fire station even when the duty crews are often away as well, and officers like myself and my colleagues as well being in attendance. And we're very much supporting that as well. Most weekends myself and the senior officers are at various open days. Last weekend there were 3 on the same day, and then there was a families day at another one, so we were splitting our resources on the Saturday to scurry around and do that as well. And in fact the Chief of Staff went to one as well, so thank you for that. Insofar as morale, there are a lot of things that can affect morale. There's the reality of the way things are, there's the perception, there's the individual circumstances of where they are, and there are other people and other organisations that affect morale of firefighters other than the leaders of the service as well. So we're clear that we want to help increase the morale of our firefighters. We're really concerned about our great people and their welfare, their mental well-being as well as their physical well-being. We're undertaking a number of programmes. We're partnering with RHS to deliver wellbeing gardens. The first one will be at Guildford, actually, in order to deliver that. And we're going to roll that out across the whole of Surrey. And that was an initiative that started with our Epsom crews who built a great garden on their roof of their fire station, and were concerned that they might get told off for it. But actually it's a brilliant idea, and most of our firefighters have great ideas. And we won't know unless we talk to them. Before my tenure, for example, there are simple things that could help morale, like Christmas parties for staff and their families were not allowed. They are now. Families' days, like the one that happened in Guildford on Friday, didn't happen, or they happened under the radar because people thought they couldn't do them. We've been really open and clear. Go ahead, enjoy your company with your families. They should come and see where you work and what you're doing, because we need them to support you, and particularly with the on-call as well. They're very much connected to their local communities. They're not connected to the pay packet at all. They're connected very much to their local communities, and I'm sure some of them, I'm not proposing this, but I'm sure some of them would do it for nothing. They're a bit like the lifeboat people of our communities as well. And so it's quite right that we recognise the effort that they put into it, and I very much do that, and I know that my officers do as well. But like I said, there are other factors that affect morale which are outside of my control. I do have discussions with the Fire Brigades Union regularly. That has been more difficult recently because of this campaign, but they also affect the morale of their members as well, and so we all have a part to play in it, and I'm very conscious of that. Again, this is a slow burn. We won't change people's views that have been ingrained over a number of years quickly, but we will continue to do the right thing, and by doing that, be really clear how we support our firefighters, and doing that and actually supporting our firefighters, hopefully the message will get out there.
Thank you very much indeed. Finally, Keith and Jan, I hope new points are being raised rather than going back to old points. New points are fine. Old points, not so fine. Keith.
Both fine for me, Chairman, both new points. What has struck me during this whole discussion has come to my mind are a couple of things. First of all, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, that in the 12 months of 2018, last year, there were no deaths from fire anywhere in the county of Surrey. Yes? That's right. When I have told residents that last year there were no deaths anywhere in Surrey by fire, they have looked at me aghast in amazement. Now, I say this without a single ounce of complacency, because there have been since. But most deaths by fire, I believe, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, tend to be older people who are vulnerable or disabled and are not as able as others to deal with a sudden emergency. And my mind went back to when I was sitting in your chair there, Chairman, about 4 years ago. Fiona White and I were both serving on the Adult Social Care Committee. And at that time, the Director of Adult Social Care, we had a sort of a mini management change, and the Director of Adult Social Care was given a new line manager, and his line manager was the Chief Fire Officer. And people looked at me a bit aghast, and said, well, what's that all about, Keith? What's the connection there? I said, look, we need to make sure that the fire service are cooperating properly with adult social care, because they know where the elderly, the disabled, the vulnerable people under their orbit are in Surrey. So by making the director responsible to the chief fire officer, it actually kick-started a series of visits to vulnerable people. And although this will never be proved, 3 years later there were no deaths by fire, because the number of visits to vulnerable people had increased exponentially. And I was so pleased to hear the Chief Fire Officer now, today, say that instead of the few thousand visits that we currently have, that will be going up in the short term to 10,000 preventative visits, and then in 3 years to 20,000. And I really wanted to welcome that, because whilst we have to prepare for the worst, and the crews have to be there to go out when any one of us might need them, whether it's a fire or a road traffic accident, and actually, you know, people tend to think of fire, but actually there are far more deaths by road traffic accidents every year than there ever are by fire. And there are also people who die in our rivers more than by fire. So it's all of services of Surrey Fire and Rescue. And I wanted to pick up on the point from Paul Deach, because unfortunately, not only the old adage bad news sells newspapers, but bad news does sell newspapers. Bad news sort of is circulated like, bad phrase, wildfire, circulates much more quickly on all social media. And it's very difficult for people to sort out the wheat from the chaff. So by starting to tell people, as I have said to residents in my division, did you know last year there were no deaths by fire? And then I explain it. And actually that is the process of starting to reassure people without being complacent in the slightest. So I just wanted to thank the Chief Fire Officer and his team for all of the work they've done on that. But we do need to explain it to people so they know not just one bit of the story, but actually what's being done and why. So thank you.
I agree entirely with everything that Keith has just said. Yeah. Which is a good place to be. Jan, then I think we've been going into this for an hour and a half, rightly so.
2 points, well, 2 questions I'd like to ask. Do we still have in place agreements with other areas such as London? I'm looking at the maps. If you look at the maps where the stations are, Epsom, for instance, which I have to refer to because it's mine, that would have to call on the up to New Malden A3 to get a second pump, because who knows if there isn't something happening further down like Reigate, they're out, so you can't call on them. So my worry has been, and it's not just mine, others are saying, what are we going to do if we've only got one pump and that's out? And I'm saying very nicely, like you tell us to say, and I agree, that we call on others. But they say that slows down the time to respond. And the worst is they're not talking about the day, people are talking about the night time. Because when you're older, exactly what Keith has said, you're less able to get out of bed and escape your home. You may have a plan, I certainly know how to get out of mine, but some people have drugs, to be frank, where it slows them down at night. They need to be sleeping and resting. It could be blood pressure. It doesn't matter what it is. But they don't respond as well. And therefore, the feeling is of all the things you do, taking away the nighttime cover to get to us, because even...
Could you come to a question, please?
If we're slumbering, people aren't convinced that the response, they will be out, like Steve is saying, out within minutes, outside calling. It isn't like that for a lot of older people. So there is a concern. That's all I'm saying. But the main question was, do we have agreements in place with, say, London or other boroughs or, like Hampshire or something, that would take up the slack if we couldn't cope?
Yes, we do. These are called Section 1416 arrangements under the Fire Services Act. We have 7 borders around Surrey with other fire and rescue services. They provide aid to us, and we provide aid to them. And that has been in place since 1947. Insofar as our plans and their plans, all of our plans, so this one, doesn't take that into account, and neither do theirs. What it takes into account is the risks here. So we are not relying in this plan on those Section 1416 arrangements in order to make it work. It should work. Those 10-minute responses that we said that we will guarantee to continue to have must continue without relying on the resources of another fire authority. And that is the same for them as well. So all of those 7 fire authorities around us have their own plans about those as well. They don't take into consideration responding to us, and nor do we take into consideration responding to them. However, we do have those agreements in place, and what that effect is it means that the response is usually better because we can depend upon others over the border.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, we've spent an hour and a half, absolutely rightly so. I mean, in terms of communications, I don't know how many residents watch the webcast, probably very few, but in terms of getting a very clear idea of the challenges the service face and the challenge we as elected members today have put to Steve and to Denise, I think our residents will learn an awful lot more, and they will be wiser from our deliberations this morning. So thank you to colleagues, and thank you to Steve and Denise. My final point, which it brings up straight from what Jan was saying, and Denise, as we mentioned in our little private meeting we had a couple of days ago, the full panoply of the Inspectorate's report, much of it is covered by the Making Surrey Safer, but not all of it. And you've talked about, rightly so, cultural issues, longer-term issues that need to be addressed before the service meets all its criteria by the Inspectorate. Of course, we'll be very interested to see the report when the Inspectorate release it, presumably in the not-too-distant future. So an idea that may well be for discussion when we come to recommendations in a second would be if the task group, Jan, Saj, Chris if he still wants to, and maybe others, to continue its work to look at the other remaining areas that are still inadequate, to work with the service and work with the needs, such that in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, everybody can have the assurance that all of the plans, all the failings identified by the Inspectorate have been fully and satisfactorily addressed. So I'm just suggesting that at the moment. I don't know whether either Denise or Steve have an immediate comment. And then whom, as always, is taking copious notes and trying to distill the sentiments of the meeting. So we've got some draft recommendations which to put before you in a second on the screen. And then they're open to discussion to amend, agree those before sending our recommendations to Cabinet. But on the specific point I've just raised, Steve, you want to have a quick word?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I've just checked with my colleague to the left, Denise, who already does scrutiny with us, and that happens every 2 weeks. One's informal, followed by a formal one. The person who's responsible for the programme of change is sitting to my right, the Chief of Staff, Sarah, and we would very much welcome that continuance of the scrutiny. We have a programme in place. We have an improvement programme in place, and Sarah might just want to speak about that for a moment, if that's okay.
Yeah, so we've got an improvement programme in place which addresses everything that you've referred to in the report today. That has quality assurance measures, performance measures against all of the actions. It's scrutinised monthly by the service leadership team and by Denise in the sponsoring board meetings, which, as Steve has just said, are every 2 weeks. So I think there's really rigorous scrutiny and oversight in terms of delivering those outcomes, which reflects the importance, obviously, to the service of actually getting that work done. So we're very confident that, yeah, absolutely, that we can, and obviously the scrutiny, extra scrutiny would be brilliant. So if we can have your thoughts, that would be perfect. So thank you. Yeah.
Very much. Okay. Wonders of modern technology. Huma is about to put some ideas of what the committee's recommendations for the 2 items might be as a starter for 10, as it were, and give you a minute to digest those, and we'll either say modify them, take some things out, approve them as our recommendations to Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time. Whom again has reminded me, she'd reminded me before, that we will also get an update at the next committee meeting as part of the transformation and budget process. So the scrutiny will be continuing.
We've had a working group that's done a lot of work, and they've given us 6 recommendations. Are we proposing to also give those recommendations on to the Cabinet? Because that's not up there. That's already separate happening anyway. So I just
be clear. The 6 recommendations for the task group will be part of our recommendations from this item to the Cabinet, and that's absolutely key to me.
That's fine. In that case, the first recommendation you have above, maybe we could couch that, subject to the recommendations of the task group. Because I don't think we're totally endorsing it. We're saying we have some comments and the task group have put those comments forward.
For the lack of, I don't like this at all, that is agreeable? Yeah. So that's carried unanimously. Thank you guys very much indeed. Much appreciated. All the best. We'll be keeping an eye on you. Do we want to? We'll have 1 minute or so before Andrew comes to talk us on the waste task group. Chris, you're welcome to stay if you like. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, committee members, if you'd be kind enough to take your seats for another important item, in fact a very important item, which we've got lots of energy in the room. This is one that we want to sustain the vigour and commitment of the group. If I may say so before Andrew says a few words, another quite extraordinary, excellent report, really rigorous and decisive and in its scope. Lots of opportunities to make some questions, but speaking just individually, I think it's top of the range, just as the previous task group. So we're very blessed in this committee so far to have 2 really outstanding reports. So having flattered you nowhere, Andrew, would you like to say a few words and then we'll open it up for discussion?
Thank you, Chairman, for those words. And could I just take the opportunity of thanking the members of the task group, who I think there are 3 of them actually in the room alongside myself, and the officers who've helped us along the way. I think we've actually all quite enjoyed it. I think the only of the things I really need to say, perhaps, or particularly call attention to, is I think the change in context since the Waste Task Group was set up back in February. It was very much around the county's desire to save money around various, across all services. But since then, of course, the council's declared a climate emergency, and indeed is working very hard on an environmental charter which will cover, I think, waste as well to some extent. And we've also, the first results back from the DEFRA consultation that started back in February have also been published. So there's a huge environmental agenda that's kind of come along alongside the workings of the group over the last 6-8 months. And also just to call attention to the Surrey 2030 vision, and again what that says about the environment. So I think that sort of background alongside what I said before around the purposes of the group, those are the things I just wanted to call attention to, Jim.
Thank you, Andrew, very much, and also to Alan for being with us. Becky and Jonathan, both members of the task group, and will vigorously participate in this discussion, but I think pride of place means that they should have first port of call on any comments that they wish to make. Or so I'm going to call on Becky. She may not have wanted to speak, but she's going
to go first.
And there's no problem with Mr. Essex on that score.
Yes, I was a member of the task group, and it has been interesting and enlightening as well to look at the information about waste in Surrey and to look for solutions. I mean, obviously, I wholeheartedly endorse the recommendations that we keep the CRCs open. I am the councillor for Wallingham, and one of the threatened CRCs was one of mine, so I'm very much in support of that, but also in support of the other ideas which are in there, the community composting ideas, working better with charities around reuse and reusing and recycling more goods. I don't know if I want to say anything else. I mean, I think it's a great report. So. But yes, I mean, it has been a very unpopular move to suggest to close the CRCs, and so I completely welcome the suggestion. We've done a rigorous job of meeting with witnesses and looking at information from across the piece in terms of waste and recycling, and so it's fantastic that the information which we've received backs up the recommendation to keep them open.
Thank you very much. Jonathan, and don't necessarily confine yourself to the task group's recommendations. We can talk more generally if you wish.
Okay. Well, very briefly, I would say the task group set itself as having two specific remits. One, to look at CRCs, and we went around and visited quite a number of them. Let's say they were impressive to eye-opening in different ways. For example, it was clear that none of the CRCs asked if white goods that had been taken there to be thrown away were actually at the end of their life. So some of those could simply, by a question being asked on site, be redirected for reuse, just by making that question. Is this being thrown away because you got a new one, or is this being thrown away because it's broken? And that points to, I think, a change of culture sitting underside this. Yes, at the end of this report, it's got some costs, but the costs don't add up to the level of savings required. So I think the report is quite open in saying that the recommendations aren't just at the CRCs. To achieve the required set of cost savings, we'd need to make recommendations across a set of wider recommendations as well, and that could well exceed the cost savings target. But it might not just be as simple as writing a savings target into the contract of the company that runs the community recycling centres for us. I'd like to declare an interest. I'm a trustee of one of the reuse charities, but not one of the reuse charities that was interviewed by the task group. And I would direct you to have a read at the bit at the end about the sorts of things that are going on. And the biggest revelation was, for me, was what Becky brought to the group, and the story of community composting in Tatsfield. You know, what if, as well as stuff being brought to bring sites, as well as stuff being collected on doorsteps, and as well as stuff being taken into our community recycling centres, which I'm sure Andrew can talk about, we reckon they should have a better, snappy name to avoid the default other names being used for these places. As well as that, you know, what if people have the option of avoiding large amounts of green waste being shipped away from their doorsteps in garden waste bins or being taken to CRC sites? I spoke yesterday to a parish council, a small village that wants to go zero carbon, and I directed them to get their county councillor to be in touch with Becky to get the contacts of what's happening in Tatsfield with their community composting, because maybe that is a story which we could really repeat around the county. So I think there is a vision which is about a reduce, reuse, recycle vision, and that's a stronger vision than saving money by closing recycling centres and then seemingly putting all of our hopes for cost savings in whether we can get cheaper energy from waste than the cost we pay for landfill. This report doesn't dwell on that. It doesn't dwell on the problems. I think it's focused on the solutions. And I'd urge the committee to read through all of the different recommendations, because there's quite a range there.
Thank you. The chairman will, in my good self, I'll come last rather than first. That's quite appropriate. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've always been intrigued by this. The public, we have a rise, public feel we have a rise in fly tipping. And they feel that rise in fly tipping is associated with the closure of the CMCs. We've always refuted that, or our authority has always refuted that and said it's not the case. I would be quite intrigued to know what the reasons are that we think that there isn't a connection between the two, because the corollary is that if we're right about that, then the rise in fly tipping will continue even though we're keeping the CRCs open. So I would be quite interested to hear what the reasoning is and what the thinking is about fly tipping in the future.
Well, I think my view is that a lot of the fly tipping is commercial. So it's builders and people like that who are dropping off, i.e. they just trying to avoid the charge that would occur to a commercial company for getting rid of their waste. So one of the recommendations from the task group was to think a bit more about whether we could work a bit more with the commercial sector in the sense that our CRCs have got spare capacity. So that would be obviously a chargeable service still, but that is one way of perhaps trying to divert some of that. I think it's the other way of looking at it would be to analyse what is being fly tipped. And certainly in my area I've seen carpets, washing, white goods, all sorts of stuff, which I think some of the changes around some of the CRCs has led to a bit of confusion as to what people can actually take to them. So I think there needs to be much more clarity around where you can take what, and I think that's in part an answer to that. I think if you look in the round what local authorities are offering to the public, you've got your curbside collection, which takes most of the recycling and most of the black bag rubbish. You've got your CRCs, then you've got all the sort of charities that we've highlighted some of them here. And you've also got bring sites in most places where people, like in the local car park, where you can take textiles and small electrical goods, shoes. So it seems to me that overall, and I think this again is part of what we need to be saying to the public, is that you've really got quite a substantial offer to the public in terms of where you can take those items that you no longer want. Commercial waste, though, has to be done separately, but I do think there's opportunities there that we could help by offering spare capacity. I don't know if you want to say anything more.
Yes, just to add to what Councillor Povey said, the data that we look at what was the Surrey Waste Partnership, which is now the Surrey Environmental Partnership, is data that's collected across the piece. So it comes from the districts. It's not just the county's data. There is a slight lag in terms of when that data is available for analysis compared to when some of the policy changes are made. But I think that partnership group have established a fly tipping working group, which Councillor Goodman will have been an active member of, and there's a lot of work gone in terms of education and engagement with the public around what I refer to as perhaps the unwitting fly tipper. So where that knowledge is not understood about what duties and what duties of care exists, that group has been trying to make sure that knowledge, and I think at the moment we have got some comms actually out in reception that try to get that message across, that if someone knocks on your door and offers to take away some of your waste for a bargain, just stop and think and check, because there are duties of care, and ultimately prosecutions will happen. They will come back to the owner of that waste. And that work, I think, is helping to get the message. And as Andrew has already said, there is an offer out there. So that's kind of why we haven't seen the fears materialise in terms of the volumes of fly tipping increasing. Michael, if you want to say anything else about the work of the partnership, because obviously you've been active in that for quite a long time.
This committee would know that it was me that brought in a fly tipping strategy through the Surrey Waste Partnership about 2 years ago, and in fact we updated it only this year with the police, because the first one did not include enough partnership with the police, and the new one does. And I think the biggest challenge I think we've got with fly tipping is, what is fly tipping? Different boroughs are still calling fly tipping, measuring it completely differently. And one thing the Surrey Waste Partnership must do is to start to close that gap, to say this is the way we measure it. Because if you measure it all the same, you can then look at the hot spots. We've got some boroughs where there's been a massive increase, so-called, in fly tipping, because they count every single bag that they ever find as one incident. So they say get 5 bags, that's 5 incidents. And that is often why the volume of fly tipping has not gone up. But let's, when after I'm saying that, let's be absolutely clear, this is a national problem. It really is, and I keep getting invited to conferences to discuss it. It's a criminal act, it damages the environment. But I do think the work we did 2 years ago and continue to do to educate our public on how they get rid of the waste is actually crucial. But what is very interesting, and then touched on it, the vast majority of fly tipping can be got rid of at CRCs free of charge. And it's that people don't always, for instance, I saw an excerpt a few weeks ago where 8 fridges had been dropped over 4 or 5 weeks in Surrey. Well, we take them. It's not an issue. So I think education is an issue as well. And I'll shut up.
Right. Who is next? Paul and then Jen.
Thank you, Chairman. So at the last meeting, I raised the issue of the policy of charging for wood, and that it's not compatible with some other policies that we have, because I think that while most residents won't fly tip, they would burn the wood in their gardens, and a lot of that wood is treated and is very detrimental to the quality of the air. And I know that's something that you're also working on, Mike. So I was very pleased to see that was recorded in the minutes, point 7 of the related item. I'm delighted to see in the recommendation that there is a very strong recommendation to have the charges for rubble and wood removed. Now, on fly tipping, I personally believe, I mean, I spend a lot of time out and about all over the county through my professional life, and I do see a lot of incidents of fly tipping. And, you know, I'm no expert on these things, but it occurs to me that a lot of that is commercial waste, okay, and unscrupulous commercial operators dumping their waste. I'm not saying it's all that, but from what I see, a lot of it is definitely that. I think that most residents are law-abiding citizens, and while they might not agree with the charges and so on, I honestly believe most of the residents that I know wouldn't dream of doing it, even if they don't agree with the charges. I mean, I don't agree with the television licence charge, but I still pay for my licence every year. You know, so I honestly believe that a lot of the fly tipping is commercial. But the question is, as we have the cabinet member here responsible, does he agree with the recommendation?
Like, Chairman, if I may, just to correct Paul on one thing, charges for wood have never been brought in. It was discussed at Cabinet, but never brought in.
Okay. Good. Procedurally right. This is committee. We'll talk it. Any recommendations will go to the Cabinet. It's not reasonable for Mike Goodman to give a policy thing off the hoof, if you don't mind.
Nice try, though, eh?
Yes, I think I was a victim of the wood charge because we had to have all the family down to cut up all the fencing because we've got 22 panels for our garden, and we had to have it all cut up because we knew, if not, on the following day there would be a charge. So when we get to Epsom Dump, as we call it, the bloke was saying, no, there's no charge. And we're going, what? People have given up their time for work to do this. But anyway, so I'm mightily pleased. A lot of this, I personally feel that there shouldn't be a charge because I think what we should be doing is saying, come on, we want you to recycle. And like Jonathan said, perhaps say exactly about the fridges. Can this be reused? Is it really a dumping one? You know, all of that. But my own view is I would like to see the CRCs open 7 days a week. I know you're going to say it's not possible, Jan, but the odd, and it is only perhaps 1 or 2 a month, I'm being frank, where people have rung me up and said, I've driven round with the microwave and I can't get rid of it. It's closed. And yet I've told them in magazines it's closed. So I do think it needs education, which I don't think we've done very well with at all. And I agree with Paul, we've not really educated people as to say this can be done and that can't be done. So if the wood has now gone, good, let them know that. And the last thing, please don't build on the Smart Drive campaign and use the word waste smart. People in my area of Epsom just say we're going up the tip or we're going up the dump. They don't need fancy words. And this is awful spiel, you know. So I'm hoping I'm not the only one who cannot stand it. Yeah, I will, as you know. But at the end of the day, there is nothing wrong. If it ain't broke, don't fix. And the CRC's community recycling, well, I've said that to people. Oh, yeah, fine. So I feel don't waste your time, but education, and perhaps at Epsom where it's well used, I think shutting 2 days a week has been a problem, and we've had queues at times when I think it could be. But I've always been a believer of not really shutting any of them and keeping them all open.
Yeah, I think the council has always had this reduce, reuse, recycle mantra, which has been around for a long time. But I'm not sure that that's been perhaps pushed as much recently. But I think in the general public's eyes, the messages have been very mixed because there's been charges, because there's been proposed closures and then partial closures. So I think one can understand the confusion in the public's mind. And I think I agree with you utterly that it's education and it's getting that information out there about what can go where and when, and that's really what we need to concentrate on and to really up the game in terms of recycling.
Thank Thanks, Jan. Saj, and then I know Ken wants to come back, but before Ken does, Saj first, and then Becky, and then
Thank you, Chairman. This is a good report. Thank you to Dr. Povey for keeping the CRCs open. It's just a matter of, it's again communication. And I don't know, maybe we should, as councillors, probably educate or send leaflets out, reminders out to our residents. Only yesterday, a couple came in, elderly couple, senior citizens, really chuffed that they were able to get rid of their madness free of charge. And I said, well, you couldn't do that anyway, you know? So it's education. And maybe, you know, as councillors, we should try and put some leaflets out in our communication to our residents, what they can recycle, what they can take there free of charge. Thank you.
You agree? Excellent. Becky, and then Ken.
Yeah, just to say that in the report we make it very clear that we need to make savings and improve our recycling rates. And something I just wanted to highlight to the group is the important role that the district and boroughs have to play in this in terms of their waste contracts. There are some which are currently tied into one waste contract, but there are also others which are going out unilaterally and renegotiating their own contracts and their own bin services on the street without much thought to the disposal authority, which is Surrey, and what we then need to do with the waste. And my plea would really be for the Surrey Waste Partnership, or whatever the new name for it is, that they have a much stronger hand in dealing with the district and boroughs and expressing the importance of them coming on board to make the best of the savings and contract rates that we can, but also so that we don't have these sort of rogue contracts going on which have a long-term impact on what we can do centrally in Surrey to deal with our waste.
So I'll just add to that. I think a lot of the districts and boroughs have in themselves declared a climate emergency. So, again, one can go back to them and say, look, you've done this, and part of that work in what you're going to do has to be around increasing the recycling and reducing the amount. Yeah.
Ken, and then Andy.
Small plead, really, nothing more. In my family, we're quite meticulous about recycling, and everything gets scrutinised. Is it recyclable or is it not? But there have been quite a number of articles recently, especially in Which, about the recyclable signs that you see on these things. Some say yes, it's recyclable. Others imply that some areas will recycle it, others won't. There's quite a lot of different signs with different meanings. And I've never, in our locality, come across a key to what we accept and what we don't. And I think it seems to me that we need to broadcast much more clearly to our people what we accept for recycling and what we don't, especially where you get the sign that says some accept it, some don't. So what do we do with it? And the other problem I think one has is a lot of stuff comes packaged with polystyrene. What do you do with that?
I agree with your comment. I think it's particularly around the plastics that you get the confusion, because there's a lot of different plastics, some of which are recyclable and some aren't. I think that's something more that needs to be tackled at government level, in the sense of the signs that they have to put on it. My understanding is that polystyrene can't be recycled, but I'm just going to ask Alan to just say.
There's a couple of points. The message about how easy is it to recycle and how you get those messages across, I think, are starting to be addressed in the government's waste strategy. Whilst there's a lot of commonality in terms of packaging, it tends to be on the basis of a voluntary code. So I think what we will see with the government's waste strategy, where they're starting to, or they're certainly considering bringing in a tax on recycled content, they will have to have a look at the packaging issues and how the messages about what is recyclable will have to be addressed. In terms of how that then translates into waste collections, again, part of the government's consultation on what they refer to as consistency of collections, there will in effect be a stronger push from government to get a range of what they refer to as core materials into boxes and bins, depending on how the districts and boroughs collect, and that will tie into how the waste collection authorities are funded. So I think what we're seeing is government taking some ownership of this issue, trying to make the messaging and the language more consistent, but also putting in place fiscal and financial measures that will ensure the whole system kind of works better going forward. We don't have the details yet, but that's certainly the direction of travel that's been coming out of the government's consultation.
If I may just say, I fully understand that, and it's mainly for government. But when I look at my piece of packaging that says some areas will accept this, some won't, I need to know, are Surrey saying no to this at the moment, or are they happy to? So we do need to do a little bit of work on our end.
Our publicity materials should make it clear, but I accept we don't issue those leaflets on a routine basis. So if you've moved into the area, that information may not be accessible, and we should have a look at that. So it's there on the website. Obviously, from the manufacturer's point of view, they don't know where this stuff is going to end up, so they can't second guess what reprocessing contracts Surrey may have versus Sussex versus Somerset. So that's part of the issues. But that's, again, where the consistency of collections issue should start to address that. That wherever you are in the country, these materials will be recyclable because it will be prescribed. That's the difference that's coming out of the consultation document.
Thank you very much. Andy.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, compliment the people who worked on the report. It's obviously a good report, tackling a lot of good issues. And I'm very pleased that the recycling centres have been recommended to stay open for the moment. But I have to say, I can't see this issue not coming back, certainly in the case of Farnham, which is the one I can obviously talk about. Farnham's got a pretty poor recycling centre, which isn't fit for purpose. It's got these horrible metal stairs. It's not very well managed by the subcontractor. It's understaffed, and it's pretty unpopular with the local population, which means that many of them use Hampshire recycling centres. Farnham is right at the edge of Surrey, and although we're one of the largest towns in Surrey after Guildford and Woking, in fact, in the last census, we were defined as the third largest town. It depends how you measure town sizes, etc. But we were the third with 40,000 population. We're not that much smaller than Woking. And it seems absurd that a town of that size was going to have its recycling centre closed, and people are going to have to travel to much smaller towns, quite a way away. So I can't see this issue not coming back if the recycling centre isn't improved, because people will continue to use Hampshire centres unless they're prevented to doing so. There's a good possibility that will happen, because I've visited some of the Hampshire ones, and I've been told Hampshire are going to bring in an automatic number plate recognition system, which will prevent people using it unless they're prepared to pay a charge. So I think this issue will come back, and I think this centre, as I say, it's not fit for purpose. It needs to be relocated somewhere else, and the land used for housing or some other purpose. So that's my point about it. And it may well be that similar in other centres, for all I know, because I only really know this Farnham one. But this report doesn't really tackle the type of issue I'm talking about, and it probably couldn't be expected to. But I thought I really should state what I see as, and the local people in Farnham see as the situation for the Farnham Recycling Centre. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Andy.
Chairman, I would like to just make one or two comments on that, because I think our experience of going around to the CRCs was very different. I think I found the staffing absolutely, really fantastic, I have to say, in terms of the enthusiasm of the staff and the commitment. I think that's one of the things that really struck me, and I think Mike nodding as well. So I'm very surprised at your comments about Farnham.
I don't want to constrain you, but talking about individual items in one's own division is not really what we're about. We're trying to talk about from a Surrey perspective, if we possibly can.
I understand, Chairman, but may I say something? Because I wasn't trying to denigrate the staff. The staff are good people, and I spoke to the staff, actually. Unfortunately, 2 of the 4 staff are over 17 years old, and they were older than the people that they were supposed to be helping, by and large. I accept your point, Chairman. Maybe I'm going, and I will therefore shut up.
Sorry, Anna, just to finish off on the other point you made about, within the report, there is a recommendation or comment that in some cases you could close one of the CRCs and reopen it somewhere else. Because of comments made by 1 or 2 councillors around the county, that's why that comment was included. So it could possibly apply to Farnham. If you say that the current site has got a value for housing, for instance, that might cover the cost of getting a new one somewhere else.
Chair, if it helps, all sites should be routinely visited by my staff under the contract management arrangements we have with Suez. If Councillor MacLeod and I were to get together outside of this meeting, I could kind of pick up any particular concerns, and we can feed that into our contract review work.
Great idea. I'm sure Andy will do that. Excellent. My question, and it's kind of covered, is there's a rate of a target of 70% of recycling. You look at Appendix 6, which gives all the boroughs, including ours, the rates of recycling, and I'm just looking at it as a layman, as it were. And at best, it's stagnated. And if you look marginally, it may have declined. Around average is about 59% of the Surrey Waste Partnership. So there's still some way to go for the 59 to become the 70. And that's the challenge. And also, if I'm correct, for every one, from the report, every 1% increase brings in £230,000. So it's a valuable thing to do. So my question, therefore, and your report, as I say, is a testament to the English language and in all its beauty. You said the Surrey Environmental Partnership, quote, needs to be turbocharged to improve performance, etc., etc. So the question is, and I appreciate the Surrey Environmental Partnership is, by its very nature, all the boroughs and districts, Surrey County Council, no doubt others. So it's not within our remit, nor should it be within our remit, to, as a committee, to unnecessarily interfere or to be obstructive of this process. But if the challenge for all of us in the Surrey Environmental Partnership is to significantly, substantially and sustainably increase recycling rate, how in the task group's view might that turbocharging of the partnership take place? Because I'm sure we'd all like to do it, but having some ideas about what that might entail in practice, I think might be very helpful.
Well, as a start, Chairman, I've been invited to the next meeting with this report, so I think I will be seeking to persuade them that their current plan is, there is a plan, they have a plan, but it does have no targets, for instance, within it. I think it needs some energy behind it. I think the county can have a big part in that. There are recycling credits that we have, which can be used to motivate. And I think also as I said just now, most of the districts and boroughs have signed up to the climate emergency. So I think that they haven't perhaps quite caught up yet in terms of having done that, what that implies for waste minimisation, waste recycling. So I think there's got to be a significant conversation there with the SEP as to what they're doing and how they're doing it. The SEP also looks after the publicity for a lot of the waste campaigns. So again, I think that needs to be thought through in modern context. I'm not sure how much they do on social media, for instance, as opposed to written work. And I think what think the task group is really saying is, that we have to have a new vision here, and hence I'm absolutely surprised nobody's challenged the title of the report, that it's not waste. Because once you start talking about the circular economy for materials, so you're talking about materials here. When we say we no longer want this glass or whatever, it's a material that can be reused. And we shouldn't be, in a way, the word waste is the wrong word. All right, some of it will eventually end up as waste, obviously, but most materials can be recycled and should be recycled. And the DEFRA consultation is moving in the same direction. It's talking about the circular economy, i.e. materials go round and round and round, rather than going off into what we currently call waste. And that also comes back to a comment I forgot to pick up about people calling the CRCs the tip or the dump, which is what they tend to do. We have got to try and change that language, because that again implies waste. It implies something that has no value when it does. And all right, the value may be lower, but there's still a value there. And I think that's a new vision that we have to get across.
I think reuse and recycling centre is a good name, if you're looking for a name. In terms of this, I think that the phrase turbocharge was deliberately picked by our task group leader because Boris Johnson has used it. But I think it'd be far better to turbocharge the Surrey Environment Partnership across Surrey rather than turbocharging no-deal Brexit negotiations, personally. In terms of this particular issue, it felt like when we attended that it was a talking shop. It's a talking shop where no minutes are published in public, no agenda is published in public. It felt like a very big meeting where people sat around the room talking about things, but they didn't then agree to move forward together. We've had similar change within the corporate parenting group, which had a group about this size, and it's changed to a small group of councillors who make decisions with agenda items brought by officers so that we can decide what we've done and we can move forward. And I think it's fair to say that group is successfully progressing and is causing change. It doesn't feel like the Surrey Environmental Partnership, as it's currently structured, is doing that. I'm not sure this committee has ever scrutinised it as whether we think it's fit for purpose. And certainly if it's the group that's going to take on the coordination between the districts and the boroughs and the county in terms of delivering a climate emergency, I don't think it can do that, which is a far bigger challenge than coordinating our waste and recycling with the current organisation and setup.
No, Mike, not yet. Becky, first.
Yeah, no, just on the turbocharging, I think it is about it's about setting that central expectation of what we would like to see across the whole of Surrey and the consistency that we would expect the districts and boroughs to bring. So, some sort of consistent contracts in place, and they all understand the expectation of recycling around those. I mean, other things that we could look at and try and encourage them to do, I would have thought, would be to provide some seed capital and set up, 2 or 3 of these local composting centres in each of the district and boroughs, so that, maybe as a pilot, or just as that's the sort of expectation that we'd have out there, that would take a lot of green waste out of the stream, therefore making the savings. And then also, you hear about it, I don't know if it's across our district and boroughs or across the country, but, empowering them more to look at, why isn't this house putting out their little waste box for their food waste, and sort of going more down the route of trying to encourage every single household to participate in the recycling process that we have in place, because it's only by encouraging all of those different people to take part that we're going to increase the recycling rate. They're the sorts of things that I would like to see them doing.
Jan, very quickly, and then...
I was picking up from Andy's comment about Farnham, and then also the comment you made, Chairman, regarding the 1% would raise 230. Well, if Farnham was brought into line similar to Epsom's, where everything is just in and over the top in, people would use it. Why would you, as an older person, want to clamber up steps? For goodness sake, get a grip here. So whoever runs Farnham, whatever ownership is, let them spend the money. That would raise, especially if Hampshire are going to bring in some recognition, so you couldn't do it, then even if they only brought in 0.5%, you'd have an income of 115. I don't understand. Everyone you go to, everywhere you go to, should be of a similar standard where it's all walk, drop down, none of this up in the air business. So I just don't think at the moment Farnham is the only one I know of, because you've raised it. But I think that needs to be dealt with. And the other thing is, in my area, I think it's hilarious really, but people are moaning, but all the fridges and microwaves are all left out on the grass verges beautifully, and they're picked up by a certain number of, I think my gran used to call them totters or something. They come round in a van, off they go, and it's all cleared. But that's the way it's been recycled in Epsom, and there's been complaints about the way it looks. But I think it comes back to information, that if you think you've got to pay £15, you ain't going to do it. You're going to stick it out in the grass for somebody else to look at. So I think savings could be found if certain recycling centres, the tip, the dump, are improved. And that way it would increase our recycling and bring some savings in.
Thanks, Jan. Now, we don't want the energy of the room to decline. We've got half an hour break before we get to another biggie on Heathrow. But I would like you to have half an hour's recharging, as it were, environmentally friendly recharging. So I'm not going to stop anybody, because we want the maximum amount of participation. But I would ask, for your own benefit, short, sharp, and the master of which is Mr. Withers.
I'll make a very short and sharp comment for those who are here, particularly in the earshot of Mike Goodman. One of my daughters lives in Melbourne, in Australia, and once a year the local council encourage everybody, residents, to put out onto the grass verge all of the stuff they just want to get rid of. And they have a collection organised for a particular day, and it's publicised by the local authority once a year. Before the local authority van gets there, half of it has gone. Because people come around, they think, oh, you don't want that chair, can I have it? Yeah, take it, I don't want it. So can I just ask that maybe something like that could be considered as part of the mix of what we do here?
It was more than quick enough. You get chairman's bonus point for that. I think there is a discussion here. If Mike wants to speak about, in accordance with the recommendations, in fact, fully compatible with the recommendations of the Surrey Environment Partnership. Clearly, Mike does not agree with Jonathan's characterisation of that, and that's fine. But I do think, given the force of which the task group said about turbocharging, whatever the phrase you want to use it, there is a discussion here in our recommendations to Cabinet, which Mike will no doubt respond to when it comes to Cabinet, that if it's our view collectively, and I don't know whether it is, but it seems to be, that there should be a wider discussion, involvement, perhaps scrutiny of the Surrey Environment Partnership to make it more effective, to get it to help us to get to the 70% target, then I think that would be something useful in which we as a group can participate. But I put it no stronger than that. Andrew is agreeing, which is a good sign, but amongst the committee, I also see agreement. So I'm trying to summarise, and I hope I've got everything right. But we enthusiastically endorse the task group's recommendation, and specifically the maintaining of the community recycling centres, the discontinuation of the charges that are present, and that should be up front, together with, again, reaffirmation for support for, as Jan said, education, and Ken said very much the same thing about what we can recycle and what can be used. So that, I think, if we can incorporate that into our recommendations, plus anything else that colleagues would want, then that sends to Mike Goodman and the Cabinet a pretty meaty package for them either to say we like it, or we like some of it, or we don't like other parts. And I would hope that that would be something, or suggest that might be something that this group now might feel comfortable with doing. So yes, let's do it then. Well, Huma, in her outgoing roles, will craft suitably crafted words to that effect, and even Mike is beaming, so that's also an excellent sign. Oh, don't ruin it.
I wondered if we might add on Becky's suggestion about encouraging a couple of community composting pilots in each borough and district as well.
Okay. Are we happy with that too? Excellent. Okay, colleagues, it's 12:20. How about we reassemble at 30 minutes from now, so 10 to 1. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, Andrew, very much, and Alan as well, and Becky and Jonathan for what I think is a really excellent piece of work. Myself, so we're going to be out of this place at like 2:30 at the latest, so rigorous discipline will be enforced. Rigorous discipline, absolutely. Anyway, that's fine. But we'll do our best, but do justice to the remaining subjects. The first of which is the parking strategy update. So Richard and David, if you, as they say on all the quiz shows, come up to the table. Thank you for the report, which is kind of goes through the various summary proposals. It's a long time since we've had the strategy, and from my reading of it, there are more tweaks than anything particularly radical, apart from one area which I'm sure we'll all home in on, which is the proposed increases in residence permit. But this is the opportunity for a short introduction, if that's what you like, and then we'll open it to the committee for questions.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, committee. So as you said, this is our first parking strategy. It was adopted in 2011, and it's evolved over the years since then. So this paper brings together some of those changes that have happened, and also takes account of new parking regulations that have come into law more recently, and also the Council's wider vision for 2030. We've also taken the opportunity to review fees and charges that we make for parking-related services across the county, because they can have a big impact on travel behaviour. So, without any more discussion, I'd just like to open it up to questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry. I'll ask the question that I'm sure residents are when they see the paper, and Rebecca no doubt will record it. The increase in residence permits, we explained it in some detail, but I think it would be quite useful to. It seems that quite a large increase, in fact it is a large increase, from £50 to £80, from £75 to £100 for succeeding tickets. Realise that this has not been done for 6 or 7 years, since 8 years presumably, since 2011. I think a lot of residents will say that is a very steep increase. How can you justify that in time of inflation, etc.? So this is an opportunity for you perhaps to go in a little bit more detail for our public audience as to why this level of increase is being recommended.
Yes, thank you. Yes, so we've taken another look at how much we think it will cost to enforce or to administer, implement and enforce a resident permit scheme. Since we first set the charge, the county-wide charge of £50 in 2011. When we did it in 2011, we were looking at what it cost to set up, how much it cost to provide all the permits to residents, plus an element of enforcement. We didn't really take into account repayment of the capital cost of setting up the scheme. So this time we've looked at that. We've taken a fresh look at how much it would cost, how long it would take a CEO to enforce a typical resident permit scheme. And bear in mind, they vary in size and scale dramatically. So you have to take an average and assess what you think a reasonable amount of time would be and a reasonable amount of enforcement, and how much that would all cost. And we've broken down the figures in Annex 1. So we're suggesting that a permit application would take about 45 minutes to assess when it comes in. So we have to check if the level of off-street parking, the details, vehicle details, sort of a range of things to be checked there. And then on the enforcement side, we've assumed that for a typical residence parking scheme, say with 50 properties, it would receive 1.5 hours enforcement a week. And that's not really much, that's 15 minutes a day perhaps to ensure that the restrictions are properly being observed by residents and anyone else who might think about parking there. So, and then for the repayment of the cost of the scheme, a typical scheme for that size might cost £5,000, and so we're saying, yeah, is that better? Yeah, sorry. So yes, so we're saying that effectively, if there's a scheme with 50 properties, typically each property buys one permit only, then £10 of their permit charge would repay the cost of setting up the scheme in the first place. So that's the way we've broken it down, Jim.
Thank you. My final question, it relates to that. As I say, residents will say, it's a long time since you've had this proposed increase. Why can't you do it, annually? And you explain that in paragraph 30, the reasons why that is. But again, on the basis of the rationale, can one reasonably expect, if one's a resident, that these charges will not be reviewed for another 6 or 7 years precisely because of the reasons you imply in paragraph 30?
When we change resident permit charges across the county, we have to make a traffic order or amend a traffic order. And that means we have to place an advert or a notice in all the newspapers that circulate around the county. But by law, we still have to place a statutory notice in the newspaper. We want to change a traffic order. And that costs about £20,000 to do it once. But the traffic order process means that we have to do it twice. So it costs about £40,000 minimum just to change the county-wide charge for a parking permit. And if you increase the income overall or across the county is about £500,000 from resident permits. So a 1% increase is £5,000. So if we increased 2%, 3% a year, the actual extra income per year would only be sort of around £15,000, and it would cost us £40,000 to do it. So it just doesn't make any sense to do it every year. So obviously there's the right level, amount of time has to pass to make it economically viable, I suppose. And Chairman, sorry, one more thing. And in the paper, we are planning to include. So when we carry out the statutory consultation, if these permit changes go ahead, we would build in a small inflationary rise in about 2 years' time, so that we would factor that in, and so we wouldn't have to do another advert in 2 years' time. We could include it in the advert for this change.
Paul, and then Ken, and then Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. Interesting report. I have to say that parking relating issues, without any shadow of a doubt, is the number one issue that I get. I would suggest 70%. I get a wide range of inquiries about a wide range of issues, but parking is the number one, counts for a large amount. I'm not in favour of treating residents as cash cows. Definitely not in favour of that. However, it's my belief that the fear of enforcement has completely disappeared from our communities. And that's not just with parking, that's with all sorts of different types of enforcement. And residents tell me that they want to see people like civil enforcement officers routinely patrolling their areas. I do also believe that Antisocial parking is a huge problem. Parking on pavements. I realise that our CEOs often don't have the powers to address that, which is why I would like to see a recommendation made that a strong representation is made to government. Because I know it was in the news recently about a blanket ban on parking on pavements. Actually, I think that's a very short-sighted strategy. I really do. I don't think that takes into account the real issues. I think what needs to happen is that local authorities need to be given the powers necessary so that civil enforcement officers can say, well, that's blocking a wheelchair, that's blocking a mobility scooter, that's blocking a pram, or it's deemed to be suitably dangerous where pedestrians are being forced to walk into busy roads to avoid. So yeah, I'd like a recommendation actually somewhere to say to make that strong representation from this council to whatever relevant department is it, the government. I'm not sure which one it is, to address that. The other factor as well, don't forget, with parking on pavements is that we spend a huge amount of money every year in repairing our pavements, and residents, that's another big issue where residents complain to me about the quality of pavements, and it's actually vehicles, some of which are large heavy delivery vehicles that are parking on those pavements and damaging them. So there's some disconnect there with the various policies on that, and I think that definitely needs addressing. So representations to government need to be made on that too. And in respect of traffic order notices, again, another strong representation needs to be made about changing the law on that. It's ridiculous. I know we've got our LDR here who will probably disagree with me, but the readership of newspapers is significantly reducing. Most people I know don't even read newspapers anymore. They consume their news entirely online. Social media is where it's at, and if we want to actually, rather than go through the motions of these statutory consultations and notices and so on, rather than go through the motions, let's do it properly, and you can do it online for a fraction of the cost and reach a significantly more people than you do through newspapers. I know that's not your fault, you're just following the law and the regulations, but again, there needs to be a strong representation made to government to directly address that. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman. Sorry, Councillor Deach. Paul, the Parliamentary Transport Select Committee recently made representations made a recommendation to the government that they change the law on certain aspects of parking, as you say. And one of them was the offence of footway obstruction. They're suggesting that it should be made into a civil offence, so it can be enforced by our parking enforcement officers rather than the police, which would be, I think it would be a real help in keeping the pavements clear. And I should say, we provided evidence to the Parliamentary Transport Select Committee when they were considering this. We were suggesting that they should take that sort of approach. So we're kind of really pleased with their recommendations, and we're hoping that this will come into the government, bring it into law at some point.
When we come to our own recommendations to the Cabinet through Matt, we may well add that as urging the Cabinet to write to the government on the lines Paul has suggested, when we come to that point. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, I think you're well aware of my views about on-street parking charging, but I just want to reiterate them a little bit. I completely understand the reasons you advance in your report for the logic of imposing on-street parking charges, but there are 2 points I'd make. First of all, and I can only speak for my divisions, of which I have knowledge. First of all, it has the effect of displacing parkers onto the residential roads roundabout. It depends on the nature of the locality, but certainly in my division in Banstead, we are already suffering the effects of long-term parking on the residential roads to the point where we're not far from saying we want a permit scheme, But certainly on-street parking charging will drive a lot more vehicles onto those residential roads for parking, and we need to think about how we're going to deal with that. The second point is, as Paul just said, while we do have enforcement officers who come from time to time, I think it's absolutely right to say that there is really no fear of enforcement amongst those who are parking on street. There's a time limit already. To a large extent it's ignored, nobody's bothered, because they know that the chances of being caught are remote. So if you're going to bring on-street parking charges, if you're going to make them effective, you can't continue with the current inspectorate. It has to be greatly enlarged. There has to be frequent visits to these sort of centres. Otherwise it simply won't work. And the third point I'd make is that whilst I understand that on-street free parking as opposed to car parks which charge encourage people to trawl the streets, I think probably you can control that by reducing to some extent, by keeping the charging within the car parks to a reasonable level. Because the other solution, and I don't advocate it, but it is a solution, would be to reduce the charging completely in the car parks, and then there'd be no difference between the street and the car park. You could resolve that problem in that way. But I don't accept that, provided the charges in the car parks are kept to a reasonable level, that people are going to trawl up and down for hours rather than go into a car park.
Yes, I think that's right. If we were to look at introducing parking charges, say, into a high street, I think we would need to consider all the displacement effects and the impact on side roads. We get a lot of complaints from traders and businesses in high streets who say that other traders and businesses, their staff are parking on, taking up the limited waiting bays that should be meant for their customers. So we know that there's, if you like, there would be some displacement, but I think we want to try and tackle that in a realistic way. If we ever looked at introducing parking charges anywhere, I mean the thing about say Banstead High Street is that there's an enormous amount of on-street spaces, and it takes a lot of time for a CEO to walk along recording the number plates, the position of the vehicle. It takes an enormous amount of time, and if you have a way of sort of making the enforcement process easier by displaying a ticket or something, then it reduces the amount of enforcement time that's needed, and hopefully improves access to all of those shops and businesses, and it's the businesses benefit from all of that. So yes, is that okay, Ken?
I think we'll have this conversation another time at another place, but I've sounded the points really for you to think about.
Thank you, David. Satch.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with that you need to increase the charges, but looking at setting up a permit scheme, £25, once you set one up, it should just be pushing the button. It shouldn't be taking, you shouldn't be going through all the motions per permit. And also the charge for the second and third. Now, in most cases, they're affecting the people that can at least afford, because most people have drives. Those houses that are near the town centres, where there's CPZ zones, they're the ones that have extended families, and there's no other way they can park their cars other than on the street. So they acquire a permit, and that permit entitles them to park there, but it's not guaranteed. So I think we need to sort of bear that in mind, that although they've paid for that, it's not a guarantee on there. That needs to take into account. The paragraph 32 CPZ zone. Now in Woking we had a planning application come through, and we try to put that as a condition that they cannot issue them with the permits, they cannot apply. Legally, we were told subsequently that that wasn't enforceable, that was against the law. Now that's a music to my ears. I mean, if that's true, then that could get developers to actually provide parking spaces. So if that's, I'd like to know if that is actually a bounding thing that legally can be enforced on that. On the visitor permits, you're saying 300 for £1 for 3-hour one, and then also £152 per day. Can that be? Are they sort of amalgamated together, or is it just one or the other? Can a household purchase both? That needs sort of a clarification. And also on the actual enforcement, there's more and more cameras. Technology is there now out there. So are we not looking into using that facility? I mean, there's I actually have a parking yard at the back of my shop, and I've been approached by these companies who will willingly, for nothing, no cost to myself, install these cameras, and they will patrol them. So have you not looked at a cheaper version of how we can actually enforce this? Again, with Paul's the antisocial parking outside of towns. In my division, especially in Nap Hill, we've got a place where co-op is placed, double yellow lines, people are parking, nobody's there. And it's kind of making a mockery of the situation. So maybe we can have something on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. To get to your first point, the higher charges for second and third permits are really to discourage multiple permit applications. We recognise that more, families, children live at home longer, and there's more cars in a household. But all of the cars take up space, and the streets are becoming increasingly crowded with vehicles. And we want to, whilst recognising, that there are multiple applications, we want to discourage it if we can, and encourage people to park off street wherever possible. And the charge of 100, say 130, I mean, compared to, say, if you a borough council car park and season ticket, that's still really good value. So I think that isn't necessarily as much as it's £2 a week, £2.50 a week, or something like that. And going to the planning condition, so the planning committee can't make rulings on. They can make recommendations, I believe, on permit eligibility for new developments, but that has to be confirmed in a traffic regulation order. So it's really that the local, what we're suggesting is that by default, new developments won't have eligibility for resident permits, but then when it comes to the parking review in a given area, there'll be new applications for permits from certain developments, and then the local committee can take a view on whether they agree with them or not, or what the permit limit should be, and then that will be put into the traffic order, which then is the enforceable side of allocating parking spaces, I suppose, on the highway. Visitor permits, how many of each? I mean, there's a bit of discussion. We're suggesting that the local enforcement teams have a bit more flexibility to decide what to get the balance right. If they think there's not enough space, really, or some households are buying more than they need, then we'll give it more local flexibility. And the last point, camera enforcement is only permitted on certain restrictions. So school zigzags and bus stop clearways, pretty much they're the only places you can enforce with a camera, and then send a ticket in the post to the offender. But otherwise, camera enforcement isn't allowed for parking offences. There is, you're right, there's technology that can be used, and it's something we'd always want to work with the boroughs, the district and borough enforcement teams to try and improve. And potentially camera cars for school zigzags could be, camera cars or something like that could be a way forward for some restrictions.
Thank you. Who's next? Jonathan.
I must admit, I do not agree that we should be increasing the cost of a parking permit by 60% in Surrey. I accept that there's a displacement issue, but I think if you have a combination of residents parking with sensible parking policy for car parks in an area, the displacement shouldn't be to other roads. It should be also to walking and cycling and public transport. And hopefully that's what a joined-up transport policy would be between a borough council and a county council. And to do that, it would seem that the sensible approach wouldn't be to put a very, very high charge for a small number of roads that have residents parking already, but actually to set the bar a little bit lower so that we can use this as part of a suite of solutions to shift from a very car-dependent Surrey to something that isn't that going forward. So I've got three comments or questions, if you like. One is on the cost calculation. It includes enforcement costs. But I'm not sure why it should include enforcement costs, because I presume that when you go around doing enforcement with enforcement officers, they also give tickets, and those tickets generate money which pay for part of their salaries. And also residents like enforcement, not just on their residential roads but other places. So schools, I constantly get requests for more enforcement outside schools. Unfortunately, schools are only busy twice in a day. So unless you have a few more enforcement officers, there aren't those that can physically turn up to your school more than once a term, we're currently told, in Reigate and Banstead. So the extra enforcement officer or two, maybe because we have more parking permit areas, for example, as well as car parks to check on, would mean that those school areas, which are a high priority for enforcement, would get more visits to the point which behaviour might change. So it feels wrong to put all of the enforcement costs on these residential permit, because surely some of the costs will be recovered and some of the benefits of the enforcement office will be felt in a wider public way by better enforcement outside schools. Secondly, that there's an Annex 1 which provides an evidence base for the increases. I might paraphrase, but it looks like you've done a survey of some other places, and let me check. 4 have lower than Surrey currently, 1 has higher than Surrey, so will increase our prices. Well, if the survey says why are we still processing with the increase in prices? It seems that we've done some research, the research is found wanting, but we've carried on regardless. I think if we survey the public, or if we collect proper quantitative evidence on something, and we find the position on the public, like on community recycling centres, for example, or on the position of parking charges, like here, for example, is the opposite of what we'd like, we might have the political backing, hopefully, to not just continue forward and do what we did before. And thirdly, it seems that the charge breakup, including the cost to install something, why should that apply retrospectively to an area that already exists? They've been consulted on the rollout of a parking charge to their area based on a cost that didn't include that was lower. So 2 or 3 years down the line, you say, now we're going to whack up the charges to include for the cost of consulting you to install your scheme, when that was never part of the publicly consulted agreement to roll it out to that place in the first place. So it feels like, it's overkill, to be honest. A small inflationary charge increase, yes. A massive increase because we've changed the rules of the game after you've brought something in seems wrong, and certainly it doesn't look like the kind of approach that's going to encourage other areas to follow suit, to the point where you have town-wide solutions rather than road-wide solutions. Second is a very minor point on-street parking charges, paragraphs 96 and 97. I presume that if you're going to encourage residents who don't own driveways to have electric vehicles that charge outside of their home, without leads running across a pavement, which presumably is a trip hazard for everyone and wouldn't be allowed under those elves of safety, then I presume you'd need to have some kind of on-street charging if you're going to have electric vehicle charging. So I'm grateful if you can confirm that, and if that is the case, I would support that idea.
Thank you. Yes, okay. To your first point, Jonathan, the cost calculation it's broken down. I mean, the bulk of the cost is enforcement, and it only allows for a small amount of time per day for an enforcement officer to walk around, each, say, a typical controlled parking zone. And the PCN income, although they do issue some PCNs, in most controlled parking zones are put in around, or residence parking schemes are put in around, say, stations or near town centres where commuters might park. And commuters quickly learn that if they park there, that they'll get a PCN, and so they stop. So compliance is generally quite good in most resident-type parking schemes or controlled parking zones. So they don't issue so many PCNs. So you can't really rely on the income to cover the enforcement costs. we've taken another look at the maintenance and the repayment of the initial capital investment to set up the scheme in the whole sort of charge for a permit. So that's why we've derived a figure of £80, and saying it's other authorities do charge different amounts, and they've calculated that the charge in Kingston is slightly higher, the charge further away from London is lower, and I think there's quite a lot of this is based on geography. It depends how big a town or city might be, and how far from London you are. That seems to be quite an influence on the parking on permit charges, and it also depends how much an authority might want to dissuade people from buying permits or dissuade them from purchasing, parking their cars on the street as well. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, is it? Yes. Shall I repeat anything? Or, okay, yeah, I can hear myself now as well. Yeah. Yes, so, and then to your last point, which, next one, the retrospective charge. Well, I suppose the bulk of the £80, proposed £80, is made up of enforcement and repayment of the. There's also renewals, annual renewals of permits to organise, and then the ongoing maintenance of a scheme. So, that's quite the biggest factor in the charge, really. And we'd also want to have a consistent charge across the county. I think it helps greatly that people know how much a permit costs in Surrey as a whole, and it doesn't vary drastically from one area to the next. And the EV charging, that's not part of this policy. We do have a separate EV charging point strategy, I believe, and we're looking to start up some trial schemes. I'll pass to Richard.
Thank you. Just on that last point, yeah, we do have an EV strategy, which I think was approved by Cabinet last year. There's a trial soon to start. It's been progressed, as far as I understand, in 4 boroughs. That's Guildford, Waverley, Spelthorne and Woking, and we're looking to install about 80 charge points. That will help give us the evidence to determine how we take this forward. It's still at pretty much an infancy stage. Yeah, the thought processes have changed. I've sort of been in and out of this for a few years now. There was a time when it was always going to be in town centre locations, then potentially charging by resident properties, and now the thought process is sort of a combination of both. What I can say is, whatever way the county goes, and there is a commitment to support EV charging, all the costs will have to be carefully considered, and if it meant taking out paid for bays in town centre locations, that would need to be considered as part of any charging for EV going forward. So it's something we're acutely aware of, and it's a very valid point. Can I just make one more general comment? Dave's tried to explain in detail how we've come up with the £80 for the initial permit and then the subsequent figures. What I would say, and I appreciate it is a concern for residents, particularly those who need to buy permits, but when you consider it in the cost of providing the service as a whole, we were talking, it's a multi-million-pound service here, providing parking enforcement, and actually just the cost of running a motor car. I don't think a modern car, I don't think you could get one tyre for £80 these days. Yeah, it's effectively giving residents the ability to reserve an area of a public asset, i.e. highway, for their use. And I totally understand the point you make in terms of it doesn't guarantee a space, which it doesn't. I know in some areas of Woking it can, and others, it can be difficult to get a spot, but it makes it a lot easier than if there wasn't a residence parking system in operation. And consequently, we've justified the figures in terms of the £80, but as a whole, in terms of the cost of motoring, £80 to effectively reserve a public space near to your property will give you a better chance, needs to be probably considered in the views of the cost of motoring as a whole as well. Thank you, Chair.
Come back quickly, because another 3 or 4 colleagues want to talk.
I don't accept that all of the enforcement costs should be covered under the residence parking. If the enforcement officers are maximising their time efficiency and they're picking up charges, then surely the cost attribution should be net after they've got those parking charges. Certainly in Reigate and Banstead, the net enforcement cost is quite low, even after the overheads from Reigate and Banstead are considered.
We may come back to that when we try and make recommendations. Who's next? Andy, and then Fiona.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the area I'm responsible for, Farnham, the CPZs are actually quite popular. There's two. There's a town centre one and a station one, and they've tended to be extended because residents wanted it to be extended. I'd just like to understand, I do understand that you're not running this scheme to make money, you're just running it to break even. Is that correct, essentially? And if that is correct, I'm less than that. I can see the argument about, people who can less afford it, and it's a very big jump. But I don't think we should be running this scheme at a loss for a start. And most people, certainly in Farnham, maybe we're different from other areas, can actually afford it, who live near the station or live in the town centre. I would like to understand actually how the money is dealt with, because it's quite complicated actually. That Surrey are responsible for the scheme, Waverley actually issue the permits, and Guildford do the on-street enforcement. So money is raised from the permits, money is raised from the visitors' pound, money is raised from fines. Where does that money actually go? How is it distributed?
Yes, okay. So your first point, I mean, the fees are set to recover costs, but they're not. It's not a money-making initiative. We're not by law. We're not allowed to do that. We have to recover our reasonable costs. And in the case of, say, Farnham, it's perhaps it's not that complicated. But so Guildford Borough Council do the enforcement, parking enforcement in Waverley. That they use the Waverley Borough Council locality office in Farnham to issue the parking, the residence permits, because they have an office there and it's easier. So Guildford and Waverley have an arrangement whereby Waverley issue the residence parking permits, but overall Guildford enforce the scheme and they collect in the income. That's income from residence permits, from waivers and things like that, and the on-street parking charges in Farnham. That all goes into the on-street parking account for Waverley. And then Guildford offset their costs, so the costs of the enforcement staff, the equipment, travelling against the income. And generally, there's a surplus in Waverley of around about £200,000 a year. So all the money comes into a Waverley on-street parking account, and the costs come out of that. And hopefully you're left with a surplus, which is then split between 60% goes to the local committee, 20% goes to the enforcement authority, and 20% comes to the county council.
Okay. I was aware that happened for the play and display system, but I wasn't aware that happened for the CPZ as well. So 60% of the money comes to the local committee then? In that case, we are making money out of it. Sorry, maybe I'm getting into it. Can I take this offline, actually?
So, I mean, now the local committee can decide how they split. It is quite complicated in Waverley because the local committee have quite a complex way of splitting the money, the parking surplus. But all of the money, the income goes into an account, and it's split, the surplus is then split in 60-20-20.
Okay, so I just wasn't aware that the CPZ money went into the same account as the on-street parking meter money. I'm actually on the Labour local committee and nobody understands this actually.
Well, the thing in Waverley, Farnham has on-street parking charges and that really generates the surplus. So the residence permits all they help, but the surplus pretty much all comes from the on-street parking charges.
But there's also on-street parking in Hazelmere, Cranley and Godalming as well. There's money raised from that.
Did you say on-street parking charges?
There are on-street parking schemes. Not necessarily CPZ schemes.
There's no on-street charging in Godalming.
There's no on-street charging. No. Okay. Right, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, on the issue of footway parking, I do hope that this isn't going to be too draconian, because I can think of a number of roads in my division that if you actually stopped people from putting two wheels up on the curb, vehicles would not get up and down the road. I think it would solve one problem. There wouldn't be air pollution because nothing would move. Sometimes you have to be a little pragmatic about these things. I do agree that we need enforcement where it's done to such an extent that people can't actually use the footways. On the question of increasing these charges, two things. First of all, I'm totally opposed to the increase because I think for a lot of families, an additional £30 for the car is probably going to make life a lot more difficult for them, and they need the car to be able to go to and from work. I'm afraid public transport in Surrey is really not good enough for them to give up the car completely. When it comes to the consultation and 70% of the houses being directly affected to sign up to the scheme, in somewhere like Guildford, especially in the areas around the university and the hospital, where we have lots of student houses, to get 70% of people to sign up for something is going to be very difficult, because you will have a house where maybe there are 6 students, possibly 4, sometimes even 6 of them have cars. They are not going to sign up to a scheme that says that they've got to buy parking permits, especially if they're going to be at these sorts of levels. In some areas, particularly close to the university, there is a very high level of HMOs, so therefore getting your 70% would be almost impossible. But that doesn't mean that the people who live there permanently wouldn't want a residence parking scheme, because it would at least help them to have somewhere to park their car when they come home from work or dropping the children off to school or something of that nature. So I think we need to be a bit careful about the 70% level, and certainly I would be totally opposed to these increases. I think £50 is enough, quite honestly.
Thank you. If I go with the so this the 70% consultation, that was a policy we introduced in 2015. I would say it's been working pretty well around the county so far. The thing is, when we have requests from residence parking schemes, they can quite often be from a minority of people in the road who feel very, very strongly, and we spend a lot of time investigating the problems and doing consultations and all sorts of things. And when we come to do it, we do a proper consultation, and then you find out only 20% of the people in the road support it. So the 70%, we've sort of set the bar quite high so that we know that there is going to be support in the road for a scheme before we start spending time and money on it. And I would suggest it. I mean, it's worked pretty well since 2015, because it's made residents think perhaps a little bit more about, well, let's get a petition together if there's enough support, and if they know there isn't, then they don't, and it doesn't come forward. So I think it's worked quite well. And there might be ways of the Guildford Local Committee might be able to look at different strategies around how to implement parking schemes where they know that that's a problem. Perhaps a discussion with Andy Harkin or something.
I'm feeling very indulgent, so Fiona, if you want a quick retort, just say, I just completely disagree with you, that's fine, but do it now, before we
yes,
go to Jack.
I can think of at least one road where 50% of the houses are occupied as HMOs. You will never get a 70% there, and yet the permanent residents, the ones who are there all the year round, are absolutely desperate to get a residence parking scheme. And your percentages make that completely impossible for them. Not all of Surrey is the same. You're making a blanket policy for the whole of the county, and we need to be able to have some leeway in areas where that blanket policy works against our residents.
I mean, just anecdotally, I think there in practice there's a lot of flexibility. If a divisional member with residents and the 70% threshold is not always adhered to at all. What I suggest is, in the particular area, I mean, if you've not already done so, really make representation of the parking on behalf of your residents and see whether some scheme can be adapted, even though it might deviate from the rule. That would be my advice.
Can I just endorse that? The 70% has worked incredibly well, and it's stopped us wasting an awful lot of officer time and member time on schemes that have got no traction. However, there is discretion in the policy, which has been there since 2015. So the example you have just given is something that we could consider offline and possibly take forward if there was support. So please be assured there is discretion. I'll be very quick as well. In terms of the footway parking, the concerns that you raise are equal concerns that we have. Yeah, it's not a one-shot-fits-all. And if I may, Chair, I've got the response that we submitted, this is via the Cabinet member, to the Select Committee back in May, and I'll circulate that to Humour, and you'll be able to see what we said as officers supported by the Cabinet member, which is pretty much exactly as the comments have been around this table. I'll send that to you this afternoon. Thank you.
Jan.
Thank you, Chairman. I went down the route, I think, David, you may have been involved in, when we were going to introduce parking outside the shops in Epsom, where we were going to have charges for people to park to get their pint of milk, because the areas in Epsom are quite poor in areas, and therefore the elderly used to drive their car, get a paper and all that. Well, uproar wasn't I mean, it went everywhere. So I'm very loath to, when it says here you could improve access to retail areas. The local areas that have got 5 or 6 shops are the lifeline for most communities, where you've got older folk, but equally older folk who are still driving but can get there and don't want to go to Epsom town centre to get their milk, bread and everything else. So from Epsom's point of view, talk to Eva Kington and he would tell you the uproar over ever thinking about anything. But am I taking it right that there's a lot of leeway for us as the local committee to make these decisions? Because if that's the case, and we can say a blanket no to anything outside our little local shops in Epsom, I'm happy with that. You've got another issue about parking on pavements. Well, I can tell you now, parts of my area where they're in blocks and blocks of flats, very little parking, but what we've done is on wide pavements, this is Epsom's done it, we've actually, years ago, made it like a cobbled so it's different, so we can get 2 wheels up safely with a sign saying yes, 2 wheels up and you can park, because at the end of the day, these people are living in quite a distance from anywhere, and if you say no to you can't park but only on the road, as Fiona said, we wouldn't get anything through. And we've had cases, and I'm being frank now, where the fire brigade have had to lift cars to get through. This is not good. So I would hope that the local committee could be given a bit of leverage on this, because some areas, yes, we don't want parking on the pavements, and it's the right thing to do. Other areas, I hope that they can say, yes, as a local committee, you can decide where there is a need. Because if it's a blanket nothing, then parts of the Water's Edge and Longmead, which is densely populated, you'd never get through anywhere. And these people need to park, and if you work in a hospital, there's no bus at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, then you can't get to work other than an old banger. So let's be honest about this. We've got to be realistic. I'm hoping you're going to say to me that this is all being down to the local committee, which I've read it like that, that you can then decide. But lastly, I wouldn't support Fiona on the no charge, sort of don't increase it. I think it's a small charge, and I mean, if you look at what I've worked out, a 20% charge makes it about £60, and it makes it about £90 for the second vehicle. And I think that seems realistic of 20%. But you'll know in the newspapers, and we've all had this before, they come up with percentages, and if it comes up with 40 or 50%, we're seen as the bad guys. So I'm just trying to think of an increase that isn't so awful, but would be accepted. Thank you.
David, I'm acutely aware of time. We'll finish this item at 1:45, which gives enough, I think, for Heathrow and colleagues who need to go to other meetings. So a brief response, and then we'll take some decisions at this committee.
Okay, yes, thank you, Jan. Yes, we hope to take a sensible approach to enforcing pavement obstruction. If the law changes and we can enforce it, then that's what we'd want to do. Take a sensible, pragmatic approach, and we recognise that it's the only option in some circumstances. And when there's enough space for people to get past, and it doesn't cause a problem, then that's okay. So we'd look to devise local enforcement policies should the law change.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen, very much indeed. So we've got to make recommendations, and my sense of the meeting is that, by and large, for almost all of them, we can live with and can send them forward to the Cabinet with approval. There's, I think, a clear disagreement amongst some members. We may just have to, they don't like doing it, but there's a vote. Personally, I'm comfortable, not happy, but I can see the rationale for the increase from, although it's 60%, from 50 to 175. It hasn't happened for a number of years. And the important thing is that the revenue, for me, and I'm just speaking for myself, the revenue that is raised is not going to some sort of profit, is being reinvested into our local committees, which are already short of cash. All of us that sit on local committees, when we're confronted by residents saying, can you do this, can you do that, almost invariably the answer is no. And if this, and I take on board Jonathan's point about should certain things be included or not, but if this doesn't even cover muster, if the expenses of the service, it doesn't even cover costs, then that makes me a bit worried, because it does mean that we are not able to use as much money as our residents want for highways improvements. And as I say, we're already scraping the bone, and therefore to be scraping the bone even further might look good as far as the committee and our residents say that haven't we stood up for them. But as I say, I think I take the longer picture that actually our residents' interests are better served by this increase, because it will provide a little bit extra on something that all of us know we need a lot more of. That's just my own personal view. But I think probably the democratic thing to do is essentially to take a vote. If that's agreeable, I don't usually do it, but I think this is one where colleagues will genuinely disagree. So I will formally move that we do support or recognise or send to Cabinet those two particular increases, i.e. the 50 to 80 and 75 to 100. So that's just a formal proposal on the table. I'm sorry?
Big increase is visitors going from £2 a day to £3 a day.
I'll take the losses together. But let's not... Yeah.
Just a question. I may have missed it, but can you just clarify when were the charges last increased? 11. Okay, so we're talking about a considerable number of years. Do we know what the RPI has been over that period of time, and whether this is actually quite a reasonable increase when you look at inflation over, 9 years?
It averages out about 7% a year, so it's probably a bit more. Oh, it's a perfectly reasonable question. Becky.
Can I just clarify, is it, what's proposed, £80 a month, a year? A year? Okay.
£1.50 a week.
Mr. Chairman, I have no quarrel with what you're proposing, but in terms of the possible, that's tacked on to the possible recommendation on the sheet, is it?
Well, in fact, if you agree, then it's just what the sheet is already suggesting.
Right.
That's what
I would like to incorporate, if necessary, by proposing an amendment that we urge that local committees, when looking at on-street parking charges, should consider the matter with caution in the light of local opinion and the likely effect of displacement parking and the costs of enforcement. I'd like that to be incorporated into
and I'm very happy for that to be incorporated in the sort of generic motion. Absolutely can. Anyway, let's take a vote on it. Those in favour of what I propose, just raise your hand. Those against? Okay. Thank you. The Cabinet will note it. They will be the final decision. They will have heard the discussion, both in favour. Oh, it's not you, Mike, I know, but Matt. And we'll take it from there. Thank you very much. Now,
I take it, Mr. Chairman, that includes what I put to you just now.
Yeah. Very much so. Right, Heathrow. Thank you. Who have we got talking about Heathrow? We've got Mike. We'll let him speak this time. Oh, let's just get my...
Yeah, I'm in the corner.
No.
Thank you, Chairman.
Hold on. Before we go on, I just want to introduce it by saying this is a very good paper, extremely detailed paper, and the letter from Colin Kemp I thought was outstandingly good. We've come to the introduction, but it's the sense I got in your presentation, I suspect all members who read it, was what on earth is going on here? Here we are, in a so-called consultative process, and here we are saying, this is not good, this is not good, this is not good, this is not good. What is good? So the message I got from both the letter and from the background papers is that Surrey County Council is really deeply, deeply unhappy about this process, about what is happening, what the responsiveness of Heathrow, and this is not a good place to be in at this stage. Now, is that an unbiased introduction? If not, over to you guys. A short presentation. I say the paper's good, so don't just go over, but a short introduction from you would be ideal, and then we'll throw it open to colleagues.
Yes, we won't speak for very long. I just wanted to answer Jonathan's question about the EV points, and I know it's been covered, but I just want to say there is a brand new strategy, because 80 points is not enough, and it will be announced later this autumn what that's going to be. Thank you, Chairman. You'll be pleased, I'm not going to say very much. That was carrying on from this morning. But what I want to say is I've been involved in this now for about 3 years through the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group, where all the leaders meet. I'm not a leader, but I represent Tim. And we've been looking at Heathrow now for 3 years. I take your point of concern that the opening letter and the content of the report, and the report is massive. The report from the HSBG group is also equally large, and the reports from all the councils in the HSBG group is also equally large. I think the process has been very good, to be honest. What has been concerning to all of us is a lot of our asks have not been taken into consideration, and what this report does, and the letter, makes it very clear what our asks are. And let me also make it clear that we have never supported Heathrow or Gatwick expansion. What we said is, if expansion happens, because we know with the economy it's necessary, we want the right mitigation for roads in Rel, which is absolutely crucial for our county. So if we can move on to, I just got 3 very small slides, just help me prompt, I don't know who's controlling them. No? Who's doing it? Right, we'll go straight to that one. So basically what we're saying, we need more information. And I think that was the point that the chairman made. On traffic impacts, we are bitterly disappointed that some of the modelling work which we expected before we put this in, we would have had, but we haven't. But we are not alone on that. We also believe air quality, construction, waste management, there's still not enough detail to Heathrow's proposals. I think the one red line for me, and I think for most councillors, is Southern Rail. Many people in this room will remember what happened with T5 when we were promised rail links into Terminal 5. Yes, we got a rail station, but no rail to go into T5. So we've been very adamant that we need that. And I've only just recently, or Tim Oliver wrote to the Grant Chaps, the Secretary of State, and I've also written with Tim to Paul Maynard to request a meeting to discuss it, because it is really key that we get Southern Rail, because my fear is without Southern Rail, the impact on our roads and on the environment is very serious. So we will be continuing to champion that. And what I would also say, that is the same view of the Heathrow Strategic Group as well. There needs to be, and I know, Chairman, it's something you're very keen on, transport links, particularly buses. Absolutely crucial. We need to get traffic off the road, and we need to get more buses, not just for passengers, also for their own staff. And we do not feel within the report there is enough detail on that at all. I think the other big one for me is the climate change. Some people will know that sometime it should have been this week. We probably think it's next week. The Climate Change Committee will be publishing a report on aviation climate change, very similar to the climate change for the UK that they published in May, but this is purely for aviation. And the key thing for us as a council, and we had a meeting with John Owen Kay about this, is that if that shows that they need to do things and the DCO has been put in, we must have changes to the DCO, because it must comply to what this report is saying, because it's a very fundamental change from what we understand on what airports will need to do to improve our environment. The other thing is the independent parallel planning. It's in there. It concerns us on the effect on our residents. And the mineral plan in relation to aggregate recycling, all those things need to be taken into consideration. So I'm not going to go through any more. All I'm going to say, Chairman, is I think we, not me, Sue, Paul and the team, have done an excellent job in putting this together. What's going to be interesting to us before anything else happens is what do they then do about it going forward? Because they're fully aware. We've had meetings with Heathrow. They are aware of our feelings on this process. I think I will shut up and listen to you. What I would like to say, though, Chairman, is anything anybody says today, I'm not going to comment whether I agree or disagree. I think I need to take that on board, take it away, and reflect it Cabinet next Tuesday, if that's okay with the committee.
That's perfectly fair. And excellent presentation, Mike. Thanks very much. Right. Jonathan, and then Ken, and then Paul.
Okay. I read with interest, very interesting letter/report. Three comments on perhaps where it might go slightly further. Firstly, on air quality. If something's bad and you're not supposed to make it worse, then at what point do you say we shouldn't make it worse? So if you're going to stop air quality getting worse, presumably you need to have the surface access going in straight at the start rather than later. But the letter seems to suggest we'd be happy if there's no commitment to do it beforehand, flights can increase up to 600,000 air traffic movements a year. Currently, Heathrow is capped at 480,000. So we've said on a letter we're happy for the Southern Rail access to go in once flights have gone up by 25%. Well, wouldn't that have made air quality worse? Wouldn't that not have made congestion worse? Would that not have made ground level carbon emissions worse? It feels that if we want to have a red line, that red line has got very, very thin, and maybe it could get a bit thicker again. It should be a bit clearer what our red line actually is, and that red line actually exists, and we're planning to put our muscle where our mouth is. Secondly, on climate change, I think we should do an awful lot more than wait for what the government has to say, because the Airports Commission was quite clear back in 2015 that if we were to stay within the old carbon emission limits for aviation, before the government shifted from an 80% cut to zero carbon, there was two ways that Heathrow Airport expansion, extra runway, could stay within that. One was the government to introduce a carbon tax on flights of £300 a tonne, or the other was to require the number of flights on all other UK airports to reduce, so overall the number of flights across the UK didn't go up. Because when you do the numbers, if you keep all the other airports going up slowly and you make Heathrow go up fast, strangely enough the overall emissions don't go down, they go up. And if you want to constrain aviation demand while expanding our biggest airport, you need to still constrain aviation demand. And that isn't clear in our response. It feels that we might say we're sitting on the fence, but if we want the aviation industry, of which the two biggest airports are on our doorsteps to play their part to stay within the old government limits before we even get to the new ones. Either we should be lobbying government to not allow emergency runways across the UK, including Gatwick Airport, to be used as extra runways. But not just that, we should be saying reduce emissions elsewhere. I accept that that will mean the economy is biased more towards London, more houses will be built on our green belt, inequality with the north of England will get worse, but that's what expanding aviation in Heathrow looks like. I think we should be clear on that.
Can I just suggest, and I think it covers all the points, the point I've said is that the aviation climate change report, which is not a government, this is not a select committee made of MPs. These are eminent professors with up-to-date information right across UK and the world. Once we've got that report, that should cover all that. I think for us to make any comments now before we get that report, I think would be wrong. Let's wait and get that report. But what I would say, and I'm going to repeat it, when I challenged John and Kay on this issue about this report, and would he relook at the DCO if it did not comply to it, the aviation report, then he said he would. And I think we need to hold him to that, because the environmental issues are absolutely crucial to the airport, and it's something we will stay on top of. Sue, did you want to? No.
Yep. Okay. Ken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some time ago, I attended a briefing on the Heathrow expansion, and we were given detailed and terribly complex charts of the new flight paths, and you couldn't follow them, but we were assured that the idea was that there would be a distribution of the pain fairly between all the residents, and that there was calculation to ensure that each community had its respite periods from flight path interference. I was then quite shocked when I asked a question at the reply that I got, because, and if I'm completely wrong in my assumptions, I hope someone will tell me. I asked, well, in mapping out these new flight paths, have you liaised or considered the Gatwick flight paths? And the answer was, no, we haven't. And it does seem to me that all those calculations, if they ignore what Gatwick is doing, or even is likely to do, makes a nonsense of the considerations that they're trying to focus on. And it seems to me, ever since then, I have to say I've been pretty cynical about the Heathrow consultations. But if I'm wrong, if someone else is going to consider these overall aspects, then please let me know. Otherwise, I think we ought to express our concern.
You're right, Ken. Yep. Any comment?
I was just going to say the CAA is responsible for all the coordination through the airspace modernisation strategy. And there's something called, I can't remember what it stands for, Fuzzy South, which is actually looking at all the flight paths from all the airports over the southeast to make sure precisely that there is coordination. So that's a process that the CAA are in charge of.
So before these flight path plans are set in concrete, the CAA will be looking at that point and could scrap the whole current plan for flight paths. They could.
The flight paths are all being drawn up. Gatwick is now going through a design process as well. So, and the airspace, I think the consultation on some of these airspace changes, and I think the Heathrow one is 2022. And so there'll be further public consultation on them. They're still in the design process.
In the light of that, Mr. Chairman, I can't ask for any kind of comment in the letter, but I have to say I'm pretty cynical about what will happen at the end of it.
We'll come back to cynicism right in here when we come to recommendations. Absolutely. Paul.
Well, actually, it's that cynicism which I'm going to highlight, and it won't come as any surprise to anybody who was in the online pre-meeting what I'm about to say. But as far as I'm concerned, this whole process is going through the motions exercise. Right? I have not seen anything whatsoever that suggests to me that anything that residents are feeding back, anything that members are feeding back, cross-party, is being listened to. I'm not getting any sense of that whatsoever. And what Mike said when he started his little talk there doesn't give me any hope as far as that's concerned, to be honest with you. There's a deep frustration from residents and councillors from across the county, parish, borough and county councillors. I even detect some frustration from our MPs as well. But I accept that we have to do this, these consultations, and we've been accused as a council of going through the motions exercise type consultations, and I have some sympathy towards that, to be honest with you. But transport, I think, is the number one, as well as not the number one. Environment is very important too, but transport is linked to that directly. Frankly, I would rather see the money they're wasting on HS2 put into local transportation projects such as this, but that's just a personal view. I know that Surrey Heath Borough Council submitted a response. Councillor Morley has been heavily involved in this sort of stuff and submitted a response about a train link from Camberley. Wishful thinking, probably. Probably wishful thinking, but these are the sorts of things that need to be directly addressed. And as my friend Ken over there says, I have a deep amount of cynicism with this, but I'm hoping proven wrong. Thank you.
Point, Paul. Sarge, and then Jack.
Thank you, Chairman. I can remember in 2013, I think this first came. 2013, when this first came out, Peter Martin was the one who introduced it, and we welcomed it, with open arms. We said yes, it'd be good for us. And in Woking, we actually looked at how the trains are going to work. It was a presentation given to us in Woking, and at one point, actually, we were working at our railway station to try and accommodate the extra extra buses and everything. But it seems that nothing is too well. What I would like to know is how are other partners behaving? Obviously, Surrey County Council is one side, but this is affected by other counties and other areas. Do we know what their feelings are, what their views are on this?
It's the HSPG group, where we've got leaders from Buckinghamshire, Slough, Spelthorne, Runnymede, Ealing, and they're on that group. Windsor, they're all on that group. Oh. So yeah, this includes Hounslow, Slough, South Bucks, Buckinghamshire, London, Ealing, Speltham, Runnymede, Surrey Heath, Thames Valley, Bucks, Enterprise, Lep, and Elmbridge. So there's a lot of councils on there, and I think I would say that we have been very engaged throughout our meetings over the last 2 years since we went into the agreement, although we had an informal agreement before. And I think that the meetings we have, because we see Heathrow directors every single meeting, so that's probably 3-4 times a year, and I think they get the message, or they got the message last time, on how we felt. But it would be wrong for me to say how individual councils feel. I would summarise it, if I may, by saying I think people have got concerns very much along the lines that we have, that some of the information is not as strong as we would want it, and they've got to get this information out, because otherwise I think that it makes it very difficult for the councils to endorse it. So I think it's a challenge for Heathrow, but I think the councils themselves are as one that we need more information. How they need to take action on the information we give them, if that makes sense. We've asked for things from HSPG, and they've not been as forthcoming so far.
So, if Heathrow are not forthcoming, is there another body that we can turn to? Are there the backstoppers? That's it, is it? Backstops there?
Each group is funded by Heathrow, and we've got a chief executive, and we've got 4 officers, and our own officers also work with them. So there's a lot of work being done, and we've got direct links in with Heathrow. And I think simply we have to wait and see how Heathrow respond to this process.
Thanks.
Yeah. The DCO is backed up, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, yes. Obviously, Heathrow are working up their application for a development consent order, which they will then have to take through examination, and the planning inspectorate will examine that. And a lot of the comments that we make in this letter are actually aimed at the planning inspectorate rather than Heathrow. Because that's why, particularly, the lack of information is a key one, because at some point we have to comment on whether the consultation was actually adequate, and the lack of information is a big gap in that as far as we can see as to whether they're satisfying that or not.
Very helpful. Jan?
Okay, well, I don't think you're going to like what I'm going to say, but I will, however. But the truth of the matter is, we had this meeting of borough councillors where the team came, gave this lovely, I wouldn't describe it pretty, but a very nice presentation. I think the crux came when I asked for where was Epsom in all this red lines which went round and round and round of where all these flight paths were. And can you believe it, us not knowing at the time, Epsom was centre. In other words, the worst possible position to be in. And we were just incredulous. We just could not believe this. But what I found worse was I was batting actually at the time for Banstead, because my son lives up on the very top and we seem to overlook the whole of London from top of Banstead. And I was saying, how high? They're talking about, is it 7,000 they would go down to? All of these heights, which now people are saying to me when they've seen a plane go over quite high, Jan, is that 7,000 or what? And that's what it's got to. People are looking at the aircraft and trying to judge at what level it's going to affect them. And it's going to be much less, much more frequent. We understood it could be the morning or it could be the afternoon. But having experience up on top of Banstead with the helicopters and the flight paths there, I'm not convinced. The worst point of all this is that I'm not convinced our electorate, there's about 78,000 in Epsom, truly know what is going on. They know there's something going on and there's been some consultation, but I don't honestly hear people understanding the flight paths and the heights they're going to come round on, because that's the bit that to me is the environment. Because if you've got an environment where you're living and they've already been, say, 10 or 12,000 feet, and it's not too bad, to double it or treble the numbers and bring them lower, I'm afraid it's unacceptable to me. I get a horrible feeling, like Paul said, that this is just a way of going through the motions like we have with Epsom Hospital, where nothing gets resolved and it just goes through. So please prove me wrong, but for me, representing Epsom, being stuck in the middle of all this, they're not happy, and I'm not convinced we all know.
Thanks, Jan. Okay, and then we'll try and draw some conclusions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and forgive me for coming back on the point I made originally, but suddenly struck me, if you're preparing proposals which are going to have to be coordinated with the proposals that someone else is making, even though another body is doing that coordination, you surely would consult with the body you're being coordinated with in forming your proposals in the first place. And the fact that these have been done in complete isolation from what is happening at Gatwick is a concern, isn't it? And, Mr. Chairman, I would like somewhere in our recommendation to express the fact that we have a concern that the proposals for the flight paths have not been in any way coordinated, as far as we understand, with the Gatwick proposals.
Yeah, this is the flight path change process. This is the real difficulty with this. This consultation is on Heathrow's master plan. And although flight paths are integral to how the airport will operate, Heathrow are very clear that this is not a consultation on the airspace change, which is the flight paths. And it's very, very confusing, and it's totally confusing for residents. I do understand that, but this focus is just on the operation. So you've got the night flight ban and how they'll alternate the runways, but it's not a consultation on the flight paths. And it's the flight paths that we know will impact a lot of Surrey residents. And so we having the last consultation they did, they ran the flight path consultation alongside their development proposals. This time this is basically on their master plan, and the airspace change consultation is not for another couple of years.
And I think the point there is we still will have opportunity to comment on that when they come back out to consultation on flight
Right,
plans.
okay. I'll be guided by the officers in terms of what I propose and accept that. But we need to keep an eye on this in the future. Because the proposals are a nonsense if they're not coordinated to start with.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try my best to try and sum up and see whether what I say resonates with colleagues. First, as far as the submission that the county has already done through Colin, my instinct is that because of its nature and its strength of argumentation, although I agree with Jonathan it doesn't cover everything, is something that we as a committee can endorse. But not just leave it there. I think we should go, personally, we should go much further to our representations to Mike, not to Mike, it is Mike, yeah, or Colin or the Cabinet itself. Mike is the centre of everything. And that is to genuinely and profoundly express our frustration and concern at the lack of information from Heathrow. And we deplore it, and we ask, and that it must be addressed, and we urge the Cabinet to reinforce that. At what point, I think, probably not for recommendation, but maybe, at what point, in the absence of any satisfactory response from Heathrow on any of the points that we've raised in the letter or at this meeting, is it appropriate for us as a committee, but then as a council, to yet again consider what the stance of this council is towards Heathrow expansion? Mike said at the beginning we have not expressed a view because we want him to engage in dialogue. But if this dialogue of the deaf and everything we say is just disappear into a black hole, what is the point? As Paul said, this is just a cosmetic lack of operation without any credibility at all. And in which case, we're not decision makers, but we are important stakeholders representing our 1.1 million residents to say, yes, as a council, we need to review this. And perhaps, and this is the other dimension that has been raised, this council only in July declared a climate emergency. And here we have Gatwick on our face, we've got Heathrow expansion. What is, as a credible council, declaring a climate emergency, in addition to the other stuff, are we supposed to do if Heathrow are completely impervious, or the government, as far as rail access is concerned, and completely impervious to what the residents of Surrey through its elected representatives are? Now, I'm not sure, those are the kind of sentiments that I'm suggesting we put in. If colleagues are happy, then I'm sure, without sort of writing something on the screen and trying to wordsmith it by committee, that whom draft something, I will then send it out to all the colleagues. But when I, on your behalf, appear at Cabinet in a week's time, it would be really helpful, I hope, to the Cabinet itself, that the feelings of this committee, having listened to a good presentation, that our frustration and anger should be voiced to the Cabinet and then onwards to Heathrow.
Exciting talk, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
By the way, you can't blame me for it.
Okay, I think.
I would just extend your lack of information to a lack of commitment. It feels that there is a lack of commitment for many of the things they need to do before an expansion happens, if you agree an expansion is the right thing, such as Southern Rail access. And it's not just information is lacking, and it is reflected in the key points of concern summarising your letter, or Colin's letter, but your collective letter. I think that's important. Without the commitment, without the money on the table from Heathrow, it feels that they're still expecting everyone else to do things for them, rather than them actually do what is required on them to do.
We have to add the point about commitment into our recommendation. Okay, thanks very much. Brilliant. So thanks, Paul, Sue and Mike very much. more power to rail, though, I think is the answer to that. Now, hopefully, we're almost there. So the remaining item is the forward work programme and recommendations. The only one I would add at this stage, bearing in mind our pre-meeting, and I've had a discussion with Colin Kemp yesterday, is that I think maybe in the new year we really need to do some serious work on local enterprise partnerships and other sources of funding, not just about the LEPs, but the capacity within this council to be able to provide projects, serious, credible projects, for funding to the LEPs and other agencies. I think there's a capability gap within this council. I think Tim Oliver recognises that as well. And with your agreement, perhaps if we could add that as part of our future work programme, as something this committee can really add value on behalf of our residents, to make sure Surrey gets its fair share of funding from the two LEPs that we are members of. Okay. Perfect. Date of next meeting, 22nd of November. Mike.
Sorry, I beg your pardon, I'll start. There are two things, Chairman. As you know, we are going to plant 1.2 million trees in Surrey. We're designing our strategy at the moment to be able to do that. The first tree will be planted on the 5th of October, and the team are at the moment putting together a strategy. I would like your input before that goes, because I'm told it's got to go to Cabinet. It is a tree strategy. It's not a major thing, and it's quite an exciting thing. Well, it is major, but with the other things, it will be brilliant for the environment. And the other thing is that, as you know, this committee was very much involved in the design, if you like, of the work on the countryside, but we pulled that at Cabinet because we were not happy with that. We also are looking, as some may know, at our relationship with Surrey Wildlife Trust. And I would like your help, either a task group, members, whatever it might be, because we are putting a Cabinet paper now. We've delayed it till November because we want to give you time to look at it. All I would ask is, could you put something together that you're happy with, and we will feed in and work with you so we can get the right strategy and solution at the end, Chairman.
So it looks like we're going to have another meeting. Thanks, Mike, very much for all the points, and particularly your commitment. And that looks like we're going to have another meeting in November as well, which is as it should be. Now, so at 20 past, we formally close the meeting.